I gotta go find something else to
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. Tonight, as we undertake the work of the city, I ask us to keep in mind this quote from author Nelson Henderson. This week, like every week, we have the opportunity to vote on a number of issues that will make Billings better, cleaner, brighter, and safer for future generations. On the agenda tonight is a brand new playground for Castle Rock Park, which will serve families now as well as the next generation that hasn't even been born yet. May we be motivated to continue planting trees like this in our city in anticipation of those in the future who will surely appreciate the shade. Thank you.
Thank you. Tina, would you please call the roll?
Tony.
What would I say?
Tina.
Tina? Oh, I was just talking to, sorry, Tony.
Councilmember Shaw. Here. Gulick. Here. Neese.
Here.
Owen. Here. Joy. Present. Chariki.
Here.
Tidswell.
Absent.
Purinton.
Here.
Boyette.
Here.
Rupsis.
Here.
Mayor Cole.
Here. Thank you very much. We have one set of minutes for June 13th on our agenda for approval this evening. Are there any changes or is there a motion? Councilmember Joy?
I move we approve the minutes of June 13th, 2022.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Boyette. Any discussion? Seeing none, if in favor of the motion, which is for approval of the June 13 minutes, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Our June 27th minutes are pending. We'll get those at our next business meeting. Courtesies. I'll just mention when we get to after our city administrator reports, I will be looking for a motion to bring public comment, offer an opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items at the beginning of the meeting if that's the desire of the council. Our city administrator said that that's the preferred way to get that on our agenda. So any other public courtesies or courtesies this evening? Don't see any. We have no proclamations. Council reports. Any reports from bodies that council members serve on behalf of the city? Councilmember Purinton.
Well, it's not a board that I sit on, but I think most of you know that I went to Helena and I was able to attend the Law and Justice Interim Committee meeting as well as the Criminal Justice Oversight Council. There was 2 days worth of meetings, and it was great because to see the process that our legislators go through in dealing with the agencies in criminal justice, DOC, and the various aspects of DOC, as well as meeting other individuals that work in the governor's office and to make those contacts. And some of those things that'll be coming up with the things that we are proposing for our legislators, hopefully, that they will be taking to Helena for new legislation. It was a great visit, and I have encouraged other council members to, anytime you have an opportunity to go to any of the legislative business, whether it's interim committees during the off session or during the session, it's good. Scott Twido was the one that had encouraged me to go, and there were several that mentioned we never get council members to these meetings. So it was really good to be able to represent, by myself anyway, the city council. I didn't go with with any particular agenda, so I wasn't representing the city council per se, but as a council member. And so it was good. So I would just encourage not only council members, but any of the public. If you're interested in legislative information, that's a great place to go. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other courtesies? Seeing none, we'll move on, or council reports, that is, sorry, to our city administrator report. I don't know, Chris, if you've got anything for us this evening?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, just a couple items. First, consent agenda item 1L would be cleanest if that item were to come after the decision on 3. So depending upon the decision of 3, may affect that consent item. So I just ask that you not remove it from the agenda, but just slide it off of consent and put it down under 3. Second, just to let the council know, we talked about potentially doing a special work session that last week of July. And the good news is that the normal Monday council meeting, we're going to do something a little out of the ordinary. We've got only one action item, several consents. That doesn't mean take everything off consent, put on action. The idea is going to be to close out that meeting, wrap it up, and then enter into a work session afterwards to cover those planning issues. So we don't need to, we're no longer looking for that Wednesday or Thursday to try to do that meeting. No ex parte communication. And then I would encourage folks, please, I'm just opening up our website. First thing there, take our survey. So encourage citizens. It's a statistically valid survey process. It's a good one. It gives us some really great feedback. This will be the 3rd time our citizens have been asked to do it over the past 10 or 12 years. Some folks do get a little leery because in the end it asks you for an email address. It's confirming that someone doesn't get in there and take the survey more than once. So in the prior 2 times, we've not used any of that information. It's confidential. It will remain confidential again this time, but that is a mechanism to make sure that people aren't in there stacking responses to us. So billingsmt.gov. Right there on our homepage, you can click into that survey and it takes you about 15 minutes to give us some really valuable feedback across all city services. So that is the end of my report, Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. So council, I'll look to you. Do we have some agenda changes, both on the public comment issue and then item 1L? Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make a motion to allow public comment on non-agenda items at the beginning of the meeting prior to item public comment on public hearing items for up to an hour or as the mayor determines.
Okay, motion for public comment on non-agenda items to go in front of the next item on our
Next
agenda.
item on the agenda,
Okay.
correct.
And Councilor Boyette has a second. Any discussion? Okay, we'll proceed to a motion. If you would like to make that change to our agenda, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. That passes unanimously. Further, Councilor Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion for consent agenda item number 1L to be heard after regular agenda item number 3, as mentioned by the staff.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. I guess that would just be a new number 4. Everything else would, by number, switch down a little bit. Okay. Any discussion on that motion? And is that motion clear? Okay. If not, if there's any discussion, we'll move to a vote. If in favor of that agenda change, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Anything else? It doesn't look like it, so we'll move into public comment on on non-agenda items, if that's our next items. So for those of you in the audience, this is an opportunity, instead of having to wait, if you've got something that you wanted to comment on that's not on our agenda tonight, rather than waiting until the wee hours of the morning, potentially, we want to give you an opportunity to come forward now. So if you'd like to comment on anything that's not on our agenda, this is your opportunity. Just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address up front. You'll have an opportunity later. We just ask that you not say, comment on the same subject twice.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South here in Billings. Being in your position as decision makers for a fairly large Montana city, it is hard to decide and determine what is the right path to go. And sometimes it takes a lot of courage to engage in the kind of back and forth that's needed to make the decisions that you have to make. And it's, most of us, I think, back off from conflict and don't want to get into real conflict with one another. And yet, in the solving of difficult and complex items and issues within the town, it takes sometimes that courageous and even rough back and forth with one another, truth speaking and talking from the heart. Takes that kind of risk, I think, to manage leadership in a city like Billings. In decision making, and you've seen it, I've watched you make decisions. It's not always a clean process. The author, Brene Brown, suggests that in the decision-making process, sometimes there is what she calls a rumble. A rumble is honest speaking. It's courageous speaking, but it can be contentious speaking. But it's speaking from the heart, speaking from the truth, and being brave enough to face disagreement and emotions and all of those things. I am passing around a piece, additional piece from Brene Brown, but I just encourage you all to not be afraid of rumble and not be afraid when you're part of that, when it gets contentious, because sometimes in a problem that is new to be solved and you're establishing new ground, rumbling is necessary. Setting out honest feelings and outlooks is necessary. A couple of you, and this is true of the issue of homelessness in Billings, a couple of you observed a rather difficult meeting today, the Low Barrier Shelter meeting, task force meeting in the COC. And that was heartfelt contentions at times, heartfelt disagreements. And it's one example where I have to encourage you, and I have to remember this in my own life, that it's so important to allow some of that to happen, not be afraid of it, not to back off from it, and to understand that it is the process of discerning what's best for Billings and how we go and how all the interested parties in the issue can come together. Sometimes it takes a rumble to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I should disagree with you, but to rumble, but I won't do that. Okay, yes. Any other comment on something that's not on our agenda tonight? Again, you'll have an opportunity at the end of the meeting, but you'll have to wait till the end of the meeting. Any other comment
Mayor,
on non-agenda items?
One online. We do have a KDH online that would like to comment.
Okay, can you put them on Kevin?
Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So, hi, I've been messaging or emailing with a few of the members of the City Council, but I just wanted to kind of formally introduce myself and say I really am grateful for the responses I've gotten in regards to just wanting to kind of bring to the table a conversation of sustainability in Billings. And I know, and you all know probably 100 times better than I do, that bringing a really concrete recycling program to Billings is going to be really challenging. I'm totally keen on that. Recycling in itself, I think, is sort of 5 or 10 years ago, to be quite honest. I'm not saying we shouldn't recycle, but the challenges are just so difficult that I feel like there's so many other possible programs that we could bring to the table instead that wouldn't cost the city anything, or at least very much less and could be easier to start implementing. And so anyways, those of you who I've been emailing with on the city council, I just wanted to thank you again for your thoughtful responses. I just wanted to bring it up and I guess start the rumble of conversation of, you know, what can we all do? Can we maybe bring the topics up more at our schools? I know a lot of young people are very conscious and conscientious of the idea of sustainability and those practices that can just be implemented at home, such as reusing things, reducing waste overall, just conscientiously thinking about our use of otherwise trash items or single-use items so that they don't end up in the landfill. And the other thing I wanted to formally announce is well, I still have to apply for the permit, but I'm going to be moving forward on organizing an event featuring local artisans who work with secondhand or repurposed or upcycled materials. And it'll be kind of like an outdoor fair, except it'll be completely sustainability focused, highlighting these local artists and artisans and crafters and shops and stuff. And I'm calling the event Sustain Billings. And I'm hoping to have it in South Park on September 10th of 2022 from approximately 10 a.m. to I think 4 p.m. I have made a cute little flyer for that. I'm going to try to create like a Facebook event and Instagram event for it as well so that can circulate better. And I'll email it to all of the city council members as well once I have the permit approved, which will be graciously sponsored by Sustainable Montana. So I'm getting the ball rolling and I just kind of want to formally announce it to everyone. Again, it's going to be called Sustain Billings on September 10th. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Katie. And Katie, did you give us your last name and address? I apologize if you did, but if you didn't, would you?
Sorry. No, I did not. Katie Harrison, my address is 2901 6th Avenue South in Billings.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any other public comment?
Thank you all.
You bet. Any other public comment, anything not on our agenda tonight? Don't see any, so we'll close that public comment period. Move on to our next public comment period, which is on non-public hearing items that are on our agenda tonight. So these are things that there won't be a later public hearing on, and specifically that's item 1, anything on our consent agenda. Item 2A, the minor plat for Legacy Subdivision. 5B, the McCall annexation contract. 6, the downtown TIF application, and 7, the eBird TIF application. If you'd like to comment on any of those things, now is your time to do so. Everything else, there will be a public hearing and you can wait till those other things come up. Any public comment on those items 1, 2A, 5B, 6, or 7? Those are the old numbers before we made the agenda change tonight. Don't see anybody, so we'll close the public comment period on non-public hearing items, move to our consent agenda. Council, do we have any separations from our consent agenda? Councilmember Ripsis.
I'd like to separate 1O, please.
Item 1O, resolution to establish landfill reserve for capital expenditures. Okay, thank you very much. Any other separations? Any other separations, Councilmember? Okay, just want to make sure there aren't any. Don't see any. So is there a motion pertaining to the non-separated items? Councilmember Neese?
I move to approve the items of the consent agenda as submitted with the exception of the items moved for separation, which is 1O.
Thank you very much. Second, Councilmember Boyette. Discussion. Is there any discussion on the non-separated items? Don't see any, so we'll move to a vote. If in favor of approval of the non-separated items, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Brings us then to the separated item 1O, resolution to establish landfill reserve. Councilmember Ripsis, this was your separation. Would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to support this. I guess there's not really even a motion. I'm not going to make a motion, so I'll wait for one to make a comment. Sorry.
Okay, no, thank you. Councilmember Neese?
I make a motion to approve item 1O.
Motion made and seconded by Councilmember Boyette. So the motion is for approval, consistent with the staff recommendation, item 1O. Now discussion. Councilmember Ripsis.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Sorry for that. I'm not going to support this. This is an accounting, just paperwork for accounting to do. We're going to put in a couple $100,000 into a special account and track that through the year and then take it out to spend it on $6 million of capital expenses every year. It doesn't make any sense. It's not necessary. And I'm not just, keen on making extra work for staff. So I think this deserves to go away. I understand the initial motivation behind it, but I think we've long outgrown the need for this and there's no real benefit to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. And I've been kind of back and forth with Jennifer on this to understand what the initiative was and the intent. And so my thought, and I think I expressed it in an email with the resolution, is that the last sentence of item 1, and I didn't bring the resolution with me, was, just a moment.
I have it if you need it.
Thank you, sir. That would be good. It'd be easier. Thank you. That they would be reserved, these funds would be reserved to pay for future capital expenses at the City of Billings landfill and operations. And, and I read this in so many different ways because whenever it says landfill facilities and operations, I'm thinking, well, okay, what are their operations? Or are you referring to the landfill as a facility and operations? So I'm kind of, I don't like the wording of number 1, and also the way that I had always understood this 20%, it would be part of almost equivalent to a capital or an equipment replacement plan. But it would generate, and it's more than $200,000 a year. I mean, it does add up. And there are some major expansion possibilities for whether it's with, I think you mentioned them maybe a week or two ago, so I really can't say which ones they are. But to be able to have these as part of something that's completely different and to be able to use those 20% funds for particular expansion, if it's for the expenses, but to me, if you say expenses, it's going to get frittered away. And I think to have a definite purpose for those funds makes more sense. I think when you just say expenses, then you kind of lose it. So I'm not going to support the reading of this. I would prefer that it say, and I could make an amended motion that would possibly, in our Wordsmith America, maybe help at some point to reserve annually to pay for future landfill expenses or expansion needs, because it was to me, it was supposed to be something that was a little bit bigger than just expenses.
I'm not sure if was there a motion?
That was the amended motion, yeah.
Okay, and can you state the exact language that, and which paragraph you would be amending in the resolution?
It would be number 1, that 20% of all revenues from landfill fees accrued from users outside of the City of Billings who pay outside Billings rates shall be reserved annually to pay for future capital expansion projects for the City of Billings landfill.
Okay, and I don't have it in front of me, but
here.
so that's
You have it
to
back.
add future capital expansion. Was that the key new
I think
terms?
Yeah.
Because now it says to pay for future capital expenses. So you would cross out expenses and substitute expansion? Or I'm sorry, just add the word expansion expenses?
Yeah. I don't know if you want to use the word expenses.
To pay for future capital expansion costs?
Projects? Costs? I don't know.
Projects, okay.
It's more like it would be in the CIP.
Okay, so delete expenses and substitute expansion projects is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a second to that? Okay, is there a second? Not seeing one, so that motion dies for lack of a second.
Okay.
Further discussion, though, of the underlying Councilmember Neese and Boyette motion. Councilmember Owen, Gillick, Shaw.
So as I understand it, the goal here is to take a certain set of revenues and set aside 20% of them for capital investment in the future, period. So I think the concerning language is not expenses, but operations. So I think the concern is that the way this resolution is going to be written is going to result in these being used for day-to-day operational costs, salaries, benefits, those sorts of things, where I think the clear intent was for investments, capital investments, projects that are significant at the landfill. So I'm wondering, Councilmember Purington, if the better way isn't to strike "and operations." But I guess maybe it would be useful to have Jennifer come talk about what they would consider to be a capital expense for landfill operations, because I'm not sure that that tracks, at least in my head. Yeah. And I think, and maybe Councilmember Neese can talk more about this, that perhaps all of this gets overcome with council members simply having input into the expenditure of these funds before they get made. So if I think that if council members can look and say, yes, this is clearly the intent of the adopted council initiative, which I think was adopted unanimously, then perhaps we can help steward these dollars in consistent with council intent. But I guess I would throw all of that to Jennifer to respond to a little bit.
Kevin, or Jennifer. Kevin, come from.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. First, I need to point out that the actual council memo is not for approval. So if you are making your motions, make them accordingly, but it's to reconsider it. So it's really, I think that was Chris's language, but I'm guessing that was to neither approve nor disapprove. It was just to reconsider if we really need to do this. So as far as what we would be spending it on, what that means as far as for facilities and operations is most of our capital is used in our daily operations. So it could be expanding a cell that we need to operate the landfill, or it could mean buying a grinder that we need to expand those operations.
So then do you interpret the phrase facilities to be just literally buildings, and so you're grabbing operations to be more inclusive of the entire footprint of the landfill?
Correct.
I see. That makes sense. Thank you.
Jennifer makes a good point. I mean, the staff recommendation is to reconsider separating tipping fees. It's not for approval of the motion, or I'm sorry, of the resolution. The motion that I heard, however, was for approval of the resolution. So that's different, and I just want to clarify that the motion is for approval of this resolution. Okay. Councilmember Gillick and then Shaw, and then Neese.
Thank you. Yeah, I also don't think I'd like to pass this resolution. I think it's, I think the intent was good, but I think it's really kind of micromanagement from the council. I mean, there's any number of departments. I don't want us to be putting different reserves or attachments to, we see the CIP every year. We already have a mechanism for seeing projects. I just see it seems very redundant and unnecessary in my mind. And I don't think it's a very good precedent for how we should be giving direction to staff for use of funds.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I'm not going to support this either. It never really quite made sense to me, especially when the capital needs the number is so much higher than what this tiny little amount would be comparatively, that we know it will have to go for capital projects because we have an endless list of tens of millions of dollars of capital projects that need to happen. So I guess I have always been kind of confused about the purpose of reserving it this way. It makes sense to me related to how we set the fees, and I like that schedule of the fee schedule, but I think we see all of this in the CIP, and so I just echo those comments that I will not be supporting the motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Jennifer. Jennifer, how much is in the fund now? Do we know?
So there's only 1 year that was the 10% per previous motions, that was $346,000.
Okay, and then how much do you anticipate being in there at the end of this fiscal year?
It would generate at 20% about $900,000 a year.
So about a little less than $1 million a year, and over time, it'd easily be $1 million a year that it would be generating, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Mayor, if you may. And then when you talk about, I think Jennifer answered this question for me when you answered about the facilities and operations. I mean, you're really considering capital versus personnel in this. That's what you're looking at when you look at that, what will be presented to the council, correct?
Councilmember Neese, yes, it reads capital expenses for the facilities and operations.
And that's the way I took it too, and I just wanted to clarify it's not personnel on there. And then also, the one thing I do question is, just to clarify, on the number 2, it talks about the annual capital improvements and equipment replacement plan. So could $1 million of this 1 year be put into the equipment replacement plan of the public works of the solid waste for future, replacement of trucks and things like that?
Councilmember Neese, we did include the equipment replacement plan for things such as big equipment, such as grinders, like I talked about, that would be in the equipment part rather than in the CIP.
Okay. And Mayor, one last question, please.
Go ahead.
And none of these funds will ever be spent unless they're put in the CIP and the council actually reviews them and decides, yes, this is where intent of that resolution or that initiative was, how we want to spend it. Is that correct?
Councilmember Neese, that is correct. From staff's perspective, though, we would be programming in our CIP to be spending them each year because we have significant capital needs. So it would either need to be saved up and increase rates more than we had originally intended, or we need to be programming those in the CIP to spend every year.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer, if I can just follow up on that, I apologize if I'm being redundant. If I understand this last colloquy you had with Councilmember Neese, you're reading capital, the word capital, to modify expenses for the City of Billings landfill facilities and also capital operations, so equipment, but not personnel. So because that could be problematic, do you have any objection to deleting the word and operations at the end? So it would only say future capital expenses for the City of Billings landfill facilities. Do you have any objection to that?
Mayor Cole, the only reason we included the operations was because we were taking facilities more literally as, the buildings, the structures, that kind of thing. You could leave off facilities and operations and just say capital expenses for City of Billings landfill.
Okay. So get rid of facilities and operations, so just say for future capital expenses for the City of Billings landfill.
Right.
And you would be okay with that? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Councilmember Ipsis.
Yeah, I'm sorry to go again, Mayor. Jennifer, I just really want to hone in on what you just said on the last one. We've got about $6 million of capital expenses averaged in the CIP over the next 5 years. We're talking about taking 20% of the out-of-city tipping fees, about $900,000 per year, and putting them in a separate account. So next year, at this time, we're going to sit there and look at its balance of $900,000, and you're going to say, we've got $6 million of capital expenses. What do you want to do? Should we spend the $900,000, or should we not spend the $900,000, let it save up, and then increase fees on ratepayers an extra $900,000 so that we can do our capital? Am I understanding that correctly?
Councilmember Repsis, that's correct. If you go back and you look at the original intent, that was before we increased fees the way that we have. So at this point, we have increased the out-of-state fees by 100% over city and the out-of-city by 50%. So it's maybe no longer as relevant as it once was.
Exactly. If I could follow up, Mayor. So I think what we're talking about is throughout the year, accounting is going to track this 20% and move that into a separate account. And at the end of the year, we're going to say, now move it back so we can spend it, right? And that's really the only thing that we're going to do here.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris Kukulski.
So, sorry, I do want to clarify part of the response to Councilmember Neese's. The capital improvement plan is a very critical planning document. It doesn't appropriate any money. The actual appropriation is when you adopt a budget. We use that capital improvement plan as some of the first things that go in the budget. So I'm being overly technical here in the response. The CIP, which I'm looking at, 23 to 27, isn't actually appropriating any funds. It's a plan. To Councilman Rupsis's point, in the most recent plan for 2023, $7.4 million the first year capital, $900,000 the second year, $2.2 million the third year, $12.5 million the fourth year, and $2.5 million the fifth year. Part of our point that I think got lost, but maybe we misunderstood, is that the council had made a clear policy that they wanted to start collecting more money from non-city residents to help fund capital in our landfill. Hence why we came with the 50% rather than each year, is it going to be another 5 to your out of city or another 10 to your out of state? We presented a philosophy of let's charge a 50% premium for non-city residents and a 100% premium for non-state residents. There's only 2 places that money can be spent because it's solid waste money. It can only be spent on capital in solid waste or operations in solid waste. So certainly you can take this action. We will do the separation as it's talked about. But my point as the administrator and Jennifer's point is you're collecting. This is a small amount of the overall that we're collecting, and the overall amount of money is predominantly being spent on capital, and it'll continue to go on capital well above this. It's real money, $900,000, $1 million. That's real money. But every year but one, we're over $1 million, and we will probably continue to that for this operation. So your call. I just wanted to. I'm a little nervous that the former council might see this and think, was the staff trying to manipulate something away from the direction of the policy body? The policy body was, it's time for non-city residents to pay more than city residents for a landfill. Well, they're paying more. They're paying 50% more if they live outside the city limits, and they're paying 100% more if they live outside the state of Montana. And that's a good thing.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Purinton and Councilmember Trickey.
Thank you. And so in understanding this, with having this capital, this investment, if you will, is that you wouldn't spend it from year to year. It's kind of like your equipment replacement plan in that you've got this money over here that you're collecting $1 million a year almost. And then at some point you're going to need a $12 million something, and I'm not saying you're going to let it go that long, but you pay cash for it at that point. You've got the money there for that.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. I guess my interesting question is, what are we saving for? If we're saving to replace something that costs 10 or 12 or $15 million, and you want to make sure we don't short ourselves of that the next time it needs to be done, radio technology and public safety, something like that. But in this case, this has never been specified for any particular landfill item. It just was spend it only on capital at the landfill. And kind of our staff point is the overwhelming majority of capital money does go into the landfill because that's where the cells are, the big buildings are, the biggest capital. But your call.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Trickey and Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I originally supported this. I think I seconded one of the things that we did in order to get us here tonight. And as you were just saying, Mr. Administrator, the major reason I was supporting it was to rapidly increase the non-city fees. In terms of thinking about, where that money went, it really didn't matter to me at that point. And in looking at how this conversation has evolved, I agree with Councilmember Rupsis that this is basically just like an exercise in bookkeeping, unless we do something like what you were saying and dedicate it to a very specific purpose. And I have a thought about that, but I don't want to discuss it in large detail tonight. But we were given an opportunity to think about, we were asked to be thinking about recycling at the very beginning of this meeting. And this might be an interesting way to start setting aside funds in order to implement more recycling in the city of Billings. So I'd be very interested in exploring that idea. But other than that, I'm not prepared to support this resolution as it currently sits.
Thank you, Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, do you have any update on how we're doing on improving enforcement so that we actually collect these fees at the landfill?
I don't have an update for you tonight as far as the fact that individuals go through and say in city, out of city. Now, that's certainly one of the investments we're working on, but I don't have an update for you this evening.
When could we get one?
I guess I'd ask Jennifer when. Thank you.
Councilmember Owen, we are working on that, and hopefully still this summer we will have something in place so that we can have a better program for that. I will tell you that most of all of the out-of-state and most of the out-of-city comes in from Republic and these bigger entities, so we are collecting that for most of it.
Perfect. Then can I ask one more question, just as a quick follow-up? Is there, I think this is a little bit of a pulling from one pocket to, put it in the other pocket, but is there any chance that this, if we adopted this approach of putting this 20% in an account, would it over time have the impact, and is it meaningful, of placing more burden on the out-of-city people to invest in capital? Do you see what I'm saying? So you have 1 year where it's 900,000 is everything that planned. Well, if we did this, then all of the fees, it would be entirely borne by non-city residents, correct?
Councilmember Owen, the 900,000, yes.
So is that of any value to say, we really want to put the burden of capital investments on people who don't live here and the burden of day-to-day operations on the people who do live within the city limits? Because that does seem like the only thing we'd really accomplish if we segregated these funds.
Councilmember Owen, so would you be talking about the entire average of 6.5 million a year on
I'm just talking the 20%.
Just the 20%. So at that point, it would still only be a portion of our capital.
Okay.
Okay, Councilmember Owen, I was thinking you might make a amendment to this, so I'm going to take the liberty of doing so, because you didn't, to delete and then I think, Council, we need to move, we've got a long agenda ahead of us, or at least an agenda, so we'll have to move ahead. But anyway, my motion is to delete in the draft ordinance the last three words that say, in paragraph 1, that say facilities and operations. So it would read instead to pay for future capital expenses for the city of Billings landfill. Purpose of that change is to get rid of the possible risk of it going to regular operations. Is there a second to the motion? Councilmember Boyette makes the second. Any discussion on that proposed amendment before we proceed to a vote on it? Don't see any. So if in favor of that amendment to the underlying motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, if in favor, we'll do a hand count. If in favor, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are council members Neese, Owen, Cole, Chiriki, Barrington, and Boyette. If in voting opposition are council members Shaw, Gulick, and Joy and Ripsis. So the motion passes 6-4. So that's now the amended motion that's before you for approval. Further discussion on that motion, which again, I'd recommend that we try to wrap up on. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an item that was brought by former Councilman Ewalt as an initiative. He talked for years about finding ways to bring additional revenue to the city, and this is one of those, because this was money being left on the table. And so you think about 20% at almost $1 million a year. I mean, that is a really great thing he did as far as bringing these initiatives and helping increase revenue to the city to help lessen our burden. But I think if we're going to vote against this initiative, then maybe we should have initiative to remove his initiative first. I think we should give it a try. The staff has said it's not burdensome for them. They're going to take the amount that they collected, 20%. It's simple math, and that's what they allocate through, and we'll see it in the CIP. If we find that it is redundant and not being worthwhile for us to be involved in some of the decisions on how some of this additional money comes in, then maybe we can make initiative to do it away with it at that time. But I think I'm not going to say we owe it to prior council, but I think that we should honor some of what the prior council have done in the past and follow through on some of their initiatives. So I would hope you would support this.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I won't support the motion. This has evolved very much from where we started with it. And though I do understand at the time it wasn't clear as the initiative came forward, and it's gone through many, many iterations. I don't know how many hours have been spent on these iterations, but a lot of time. It's creating a mini CIP within the CIP. I don't know exactly how else to say it other than that. I can't imagine what would happen if this multiplied across different departments and different fees that are collected. I won't support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gina, just a procedural question for you. Again, this is a motion to formalize what was already the instruction of council to staff. So if this passes, that earlier instruction will have been formalized and will know to segregate these dollars. On the other hand, if it fails, and again, the motion is just for approval, then we'll still have the original instruction to staff. Staff can come back to us and ask more specifically to get rid of that, but I'm just clarifying that if this motion passes, it's clear. If it fails, our situation is not cleared. I just want to give you, and I guess council, also kind of a reminder of where we're at with this as well. Does that make sense?
Mayor, thank you. It does make sense, and I think that is precisely why the staff memo reads as it does, so that you could, if you wanted to now, you could discuss that and take that up, because the recommendation is for council to reconsider that issue.
Okay, I'm just reminding council what is before you and what is not. So before we move to a vote on, again, the motion before us, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. I move we make a substitute motion, which is to merely make this a reconsideration and not for approval of the resolution, consistent with the agenda. Thank you.
Councilor Joy, I need some clarification. What does it mean to reconsider? This is not a motion for reconsideration. Our time for doing that elapsed months ago.
The staff memo, I'm sorry, the agenda does not call for the approval of the resolution, as I understand.
Yeah, the recommendation just says reconsider, but I don't know what that means.
So I can tell you.
Do what we've been doing, having a discussion, I guess.
I think so, Mayor. Sorry to interrupt. Mayor and Council, my use of the term reconsider was not in the parliamentary sense. I was not suggesting we go back years later and reconsider that action. It ultimately, though, was from a practical standpoint, reconsidering setting aside the 20. Again, just remind folks, for anyone who thinks we're trying not to collect $900,000, we raised out of city 50%, out of state 100%. So that policy, nobody's debating the merits of non-city residents paying more and out-of-staters paying more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize for interrupting. I'm just going to point out to council in the staff alternatives section, two alternatives are proposed. One is to approve the resolution establishing a landfill reserve for future capital expenses, or not approve the resolution. If not approved, the revenues collected from customers who pay outside Billings rates will continue to be used for solid waste personnel, operations and maintenance, capital, and debt service expenses. In other words, my interpretation of that is if not approved, the earlier instruction to staff goes away. But the current motion that is in front of, or is currently up is, because we're not bound by what's in the staff report. And the motion was just for approval. So I just want that not to have any doubt about that. And I apologize, Councilmember Joy, if you wanted to follow up because we were having this discussion.
No.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
I'll make a substitute motion then to not approve the resolution.
Okay, the substitute motion is to reject the resolution. Okay. And with it, any previous instructions to staff. Second by Councilmember Rupsis. Okay, now discussion on that substitute motion, which again would eliminate the first motion. Councilmember Owen.
Maybe I'm just new here, but I am utterly baffled. Couldn't you just vote down the previous motion rather than have a substitute amendment not to do the motion?
Well, the point is, if we vote down the previous resolution, that resolution goes away.
Got it.
But the world in which we are living today was based on the previous direction of council to segregate these dollars.
Correct.
So that becomes the default.
Got it.
We could do that, but I'm just asking for clarification.
The motion now is just to
Sorry.
simply not do what the previous motion was, correct?
No, it is to not, yes, and permanently, yes.
Yes?
And,
Can I clarify? Yes.
And to get rid of the previous instruction to segregate the dollars.
That's the piece I was missing. Sorry,
No, thank you. I'm trying to eliminate a step here of
Okay.
But
Because I thought I heard you just say not do the motion.
not approve the resolution, but
Yeah.
that would be if the
resolution would not just go away.
Yeah,
The previous instruction to
would still
staff.
be there.
So we're
to
undoing the
segregate.
council initiative.
You're undoing what was done in 2021 if this substitute motion passes. Is that substitute motion clear to everybody, I think, now?
The rejection
Okay.
of the resolution.
It would reject the resolution and reject the earlier instruction to staff.
Second part of the resolution.
Okay? Any further discussion now on the motion, the substitution, motion to substitute?
So again, I think this makes sense because back when this original instruction was made, we didn't have the 50%, 100% premium. We've now gone well past that. We're spending well more of our premium fees charged out of city, out of state customers on capital expenses. The old instruction is no longer necessary.
Further discussion, Councilmember Bernice.
I think by rejecting it, that this will actually, again, taking away, it actually adds into a lot of different expenses that was the whole reason why this was segregated, to make sure it only went to capital expenses or capital improvements. And now we're talking about personnel and any other thing that may need to be done that are outside of capital. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw.
Yes, I just want to clarify, again, exactly what Councilmember Rupsis just said, that when this originally came about, the idea was let's increase landfill fees by 20% and earmark that amount for capital expenses. And that totally made sense. But then we increased them by a lot more than that. And so having this also, I don't think these two things work well together at this point, which is hence the need for the substitute motion.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to read something that this was back in, as of June 8th, 2020, the council meeting, Councilmember Ewald made a motion to raise the out-of-state and tipping fees and use the increased funds toward the landfill expansion. It never did say anything about operations. It was for expansion. I just wanted to clarify what the motion was for. And it was seconded by Councilman Chirichi.
Okay, any further discussion on the substitute motion? Okay, I think I know what's going to happen here, but let's get it over with, okay? Okay, so if voting in favor of the substitute motion, which again gets rid of the resolution and the previous instruction to segregate these dollars, if voting in favor of that, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are council members Shaw, Gulick, Joy, Tricky, and Rupsis. And if voting in opposition, raise your hand. And our council members Neese, Owen, Cole, Purington, and Boyette. So as anticipated, the substitute motion fails, brings us back to the underlying motion, which is to approve the resolution. And I have a funny feeling how that was going to end up too. But we're back on discussion on that one, Councilmember Neese.
I'd like to make a substitute motion to table this to the next business session. We have a full council.
Okay, the motion is to table, and I assume that's in order, and I assume it needs a second. Councilmember Purington, any discussion on the motion to table? Was it indefinitely or to a specific?
To the next business session, we have a full council meeting. Okay. Because it's 5-5 the whole time.
Okay, so is the motion to delay this until the next business meeting clear? Okay. If in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, we'll have a show of hands. If in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor, council members Shaw, Neese, Owen, Cole, Boyette, and Purington. If voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Council members Gulick, Joy, Tricky, and Rupsis. That motion passes and puts us out of our misery for the time being until our next business meeting. Thank you, everybody. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes then item number 1, our consent agenda, brings us to our first item of our regular agenda, item number 2. Tony, would you read item number 2?
Item number 2, public hearing and resolution vacating portions of Rich Lane, Will Way, and Camp Lane rights-of-way. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval, or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Our city engineer, Mac Fogelson, is our presenter this evening. Mac.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. First agenda item number 2 is the rights-of-way vacation in Legacy subdivision. So a little bit of location, it's the red shaded area marked with the red star. We're a little bit south of Grand Avenue, west of 52nd Street West. Vintage Estate subdivision is directly north. You'll see the ditch coming across the stream, that's the big ditch. Ben Steele Middle School is located further to the west. That's where we're looking. So some of the details on what the applicant's request is. The code is covered in Administrative Order number 56. We can vacate rights of way when the public has no cost basis. That has to also be unimproved, meaning there's no streets, there's no utilities built there yet. And then the process says you return that property to the adjacent owner. So the streets kind of shown in the exhibit that they are requesting to vacate are Rich Lane, Will Way, and Camp Lane. Those were originally created with the plat of Legacy subdivision in 2006. Again, no improvements there yet. Following this, and I'll have a little timeline, you'll see a preliminary plat for a new subdivision. So that's kind of a sneak preview. And theoretically, that new subdivision would be constructed yet this year. So kind of a 3-step process. You'll notice that 2 of those dates are tonight. So one is right after the other. That's agenda item 2, little a, coming up. So item number 2 is the right-of-way vacation. That's where we vacate the old platted streets. Immediately behind that, we create one lot, which to further subdivide. And then sneak preview in the future on the 25th, we would have a new plat before us creating new lots and new streets. So on the left-hand side of the slide there is the plat that vacates those streets and creates one lot, and then a sneak preview on the right, what you'll be seeing on July 25th with new streets and new lots. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I believe the applicant agent is here if you have any questions for them.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mac? Before we open up for public hearing. Any questions for Mac? Okay, we'll open up for public hearing. And if our applicant wants to address us, please feel free. This is an opportunity for anybody who would like to address us to tell us your name and address. And because you're the applicant, we'll be generous on the 3 minutes if you need it, but go ahead.
Greg Reed with WWC Engineering. I'm the agent for this project. I don't have any additional items to add for clarification of what's going on with the overall process. It's the vacation of the streets is one item, vacation plat, and then the third item, as Mac addressed, is the major subdivision that's coming forward. The one point that I would like to note about it is, in doing this, the number of single-family residences that can be constructed in that area actually remains the same as what it was before. Previously, there was a larger lot in the northeast corner that had 3 units approved on it. So the major subdivision plat, while it appears to have another couple of lots, has the same number of single-family houses. In addition to that, the vacation of the roads that were in the middle for 2 streets now will decrease the overall road length for the city. So future return on investment or operational expense costs is actually decreased by maintaining the same number of houses. And with that, I can answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilmember Neese.
Just real quick on that, I noticed in the other one, it looked like there's trails and things through the old, you're just going to have sidewalks, or boulevard sidewalks throughout the project now?
Yes, Councilmember Neese. The old one had 50-foot right-of-ways, so there was a 3-foot sidewalk and trail either side to get to the standard 56-foot. This one has 56 feet right-of-ways.
Great.
So there's no need for the easements anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Greg? Don't see any. Thank you very much. So this is a public hearing on item number 2. 2 is not 2A. So if you'd like to comment on the vacation element, please come forward. Any other public comment? Don't see any, so we'll close our public hearing and come back to council. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the resolution vacating portions of Rich Lane, Will Way, and Camp Lane rights-of-way as recommended by staff.
Thank you. Second by Councilmember Purington. Motion is for approval. Discussion on the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, if in favor of the motion, which is for approval, consistent with the staff recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Tony, would you read item 2A?
Item 2A, preliminary subsequent minor plat of amended plat of Legacy subdivision located west of 52nd Street West and east of Behringer Way, south of the Big Ditch. Doug Wild, owner, WWC Engineering agent. Staff recommends conditional approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you much. Mac, further presentation on this item? Okay, so this is just the minor plat. Motions or questions? Councilmember Gulick?
Yeah, just thought that it's a conditional approval. What are the conditions? I didn't see them in the staff write-up, but maybe I just missed them.
Good evening, Council. The conditions of approval for this, I believe there are 3. It's the standard conditions. Minor modifications may be made to the SIA or other final documents to bring them into acceptable conformance, compliance with, compliance with the final plat requirements, and, oh, sorry, I think I have the wrong one up. 1 second, please.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm not seeing in the
Yeah,
staff report the list or proposed letter of approval that includes, typically that would include the standard conditions.
It would. And the minimum amount of conditions that we usually have are three. And the three are coordination with the United States Postal Service, minor modifications to the final documents, and compliance with the subdivision regulations. It would be great if we could make those, knowing that we have literally hundreds of subdivisions that have those three conditions, if we could still make that happen tonight and not delaying them. Thank you for catching that. I apologize for that. But those are the nature of the three. There were no additional conditions related to it. And if you, I guess the best way to handle it is if you want to reference what we know are the three standard conditions of approval and just feel confident that we would be able to use those in the mayor's letter. Or if you're not comfortable with that, then we would need to delay.
And Monica, could you go over those three again?
Sure. It's coordination with the United States Postal Service for a mailbox, which ultimately that's not even going to be a condition that matters because they're planning to immediately further subdivide. So it'll be handled with that development. Second, it's that minor modifications may be made to the SIA and other accompanying documents to bring them into acceptable final format. And also that the final plat is in compliance with the subdivision regulations, rules, administrative rules of the state of Montana.
Okay, Councilmember Gillick, is that clear to you?
Yes, I have those down.
Okay, we'll have to resolve that issue. Councilmember Neese?
Yeah, Monica, is the waiver part of the SIA?
It is.
So that doesn't need to be an additional condition.
No, it's with your approval because your approval of the preliminary plat includes the SIA and also adopts the findings of fact.
Okay, further questions or motion? Councilmember Neese, you had your hand up. I don't know if that's still the case. And then Councilmember
I was going to wait for a motion, then I'm going to amend it.
Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. I move to conditionally approve the preliminary subsequent minor plat of amended plat of Legacy subdivision as recommended by staff. And I guess I don't need to add in the three conditions because that's part of this. I don't need to add that, correct, to the motion? That's already, I trust that those are standard three conditions.
Okay, motion is for approval to include the standard conditions mentioned. Second, Councilmember Purinton. Okay, further discussion. Councilmember Neese?
Mayor, you and I have discussed the waivers on these often, and I think Gina answered our question finally not too long ago, and so I'm going to make a motion to amend this waiver that we include the new language that Gina had recommended. I noticed that legal did not review this, so it's possible they weren't aware that Gina came up with the language that allows, in other words, before the last sentence on the waiver, I would add this waiver in addition to any other recorded waiver related to this property described herein and is not intended to replace, supersede, or invalidate any such waiver. If you recall that email from Gina not too long ago.
I do. And Gina, is that your recommendation as well? Here?
Mayor and council, yes, that's the language that I proposed if council desired to have such language in those waivers.
Okay, thank you. So there's an underlying motion to approve this as a motion to amend the waiver to include that language. Is there a second on that? Councilmember Purinton. Okay. Any discussion on the amendment? This is again just the amendment to add that language to the waiver. Any discussion? If not, we'll go to a vote on the amendment, proposed amendment. If in favor of that proposed amendment, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. That motion passes unanimously. The underlying motion has now been amended. Now discussion on the amended motion. Is there any discussion before we proceed to a vote? If not, we'll move ahead. If in favor of the amended motion, which is approval of the minor plat item 2A, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes. That concludes item 2 and brings us to item 3. Tony, would you read item number 3, please?
Item 3, public hearing and variance to site development ordinance from BMCC Section 6-1208H5 for one additional drive approach to the east side of Ditton Drive. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval, or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. And just a reminder that we'll, if this is approved, we'll take up the easement issue after this item because they both involve the same subdivision. Back to Mac.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening again. Started off this with the variance request. I want to do a little bit of looking at the history because there's been some questions about where this has been in the past, and we want to talk a little bit about where we are today. So going back to 1962, we have Lake Hills Subdivision 25th filing, which created the lots seen on the screen. You have Ditton Drive on the east side, single-family lots in there off of Greenbrier Road. This is north of Lake Hills Subdivision. Recently, in March of 2019, a preliminary plat went through that vacated a portion of Ditton Drive, Lake Heights Drive, and created essentially one lot, as you see on the screen. That received final plat approval in 2020. Subsequent to that, and then that was going to theoretically go through as a patio home development. In the meantime, there was some neighborhood concern that went through a court process. Not going to get into the details of that, but I want to talk a little bit about what that court order mandated. It mandated that parcel be separated and basically into two halves. The west half was reverted to its original lot configuration, kind of in the red boundary there, single-family lots. The portion on east of Ditton Drive in the green boundary there was left alone and basically validated the covenants that said the area in green could be either further subdivided for the purposes of developing a patio home project. One of the things, and I know Gina would say the city would not be involved in reviewing covenants, but we did take a look just to make sure that this request is hopefully not in conflict with those, and we believe that this request is not in conflict. Final point there, this patio home project would be developed as N3, and that is a requirement of that court order. No multifamily. So a little bit of the history on where we are today. So there's a couple other processes going along parallel to the variance request. First of all, we have the master site plan process, which is the review of the patio home project on the east side of Ditton Drive. What happens there, it's going through zoning, parking, landscaping, drainage review. So a subset of that would be the request for the drive approach variance, and which would be also item number 4, which are the easements that come after that. In parallel with that, there's a private contract for public street construction. And I'll back up a bit. That would be for the public street of Ditton Drive and Lake Hills Drive. So there's a public street that is in between the parcels. That project is currently under review for the public street portion. So getting into the details of the variance that was requested, we have site development ordinance that kind of spells out how many approaches a particular parcel can have to a public street. And I'll let you read the details, but one driveway for less than 60, 2 for 60 to 600 feet of frontage, and 1 for each 300 feet over 600 feet of frontage. So the exhibit on the right, by code, that parcel is allowed 4 curb cuts. And when we say curb cuts, that's synonymous in our world with the drive approach. So those are the same thing. So by rights, they would be allowed 4 drive approaches. The variance is requesting an additional approach. So we're showing 5 of those, the applicant is, and those are kind of listed in the blue clouds. Those are the 5 approaches on the east side of Ditton. I will point out on the west side of Ditton, if you recall back to the single family lots, there could be up to 11 approaches, 1 for each of the single family lots on the west side of Ditton. And at that point, staff is recommending approval of variance. There were some questions related to parking, so I thought we'd hit on those a little bit and discuss that with Monica previously. But so Denton Drive is being constructed, and Lake Heights Drive is a city public street. It's the standard 34-foot public residential street, about 5-foot boulevard sidewalks on both sides. I looked at, okay, question on parking, what physically might be parking on the public street for the single-family residences, and there's about 11 or 18 stalls that kind of fit in there. And then between the 5 proposed approaches on the east side, there would be about 36 parking stalls. That's just public street parking, okay? With the patio home project, they are required to meet off-street parking, and obviously that's under review under a separate process. That can be met with garages, surface parking, or a combination of the two. And those are reviewed at the time of building application. So kind of back to the criteria that we're considering tonight. Council has the authority to do this, and it needs to serve the public interest and welfare. It has to be in conformance with zoning, the comprehensive plan, and subdivision regulations. A couple key points. Variance can be approved or disapproved, obviously. And so what if it's not approved? Site could be developed with 4 approaches to Denton Drive, but probably requires some rearrangement of the patio home layout. And either side of that equation, there are no fiscal effects. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mac. If I can start you off, just help me with the math a little bit on the existing number of approaches. My understanding is that there's 970 feet of frontage, and our site development ordinance allows 2 for the first 600 feet, another one for the next 100, so now you're at 900. But don't you have to get to 1,200 to get to 4?
We interpret that next chunk of distance as an additional approach allowed. Yes.
So your interpretation is that if you have 901 feet, you get the 4th one.
Correct.
You don't have to get to 1,200.
Correct.
You know, the ordinance says that there'll be 1 additional driveway for each additional 300 feet of frontage. Doesn't say for some part of 300, you know, or 3 inches. It says for each additional 300 feet. So now I don't think that necessarily goes to the merits here, but it's very important because if we were to approve 5, the language of the staff recommendation is for 1 additional. It is not for 5. So if my interpretation were to prevail, they would be stuck back at their 4. So I just want to clarify that when we get around to talking about that. If we really want them to have 5, my recommendation is we say 5. We don't say 1 additional, would be my point. We can debate who has the better interpretation of that issue. But anyway, that was my question. Other questions for Mac? Councilmember Purington, Councilmember Owen?
Oh, it's got on. So, Mac, whenever you're describing these lanes, how wide are those lanes?
Councilmember Purington, I assume you're talking about the
ones that are going
the driveways. Those are proposed at 30 feet wide, plus they have a 2-foot wide curb and ribbon curb, so 34 feet.
Okay, I see it now. Okay, so follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
So whenever you talk about off-street parking, is that on Denton Drive, or is that within the patio home subdivision?
Off-street parking would, Councilmember Purington, refer to the off-street, meaning off Denton on the private patio home development area.
Within the patio development?
Correct.
So is there parking on that east side of Denton? Would there be off-street parking available?
Councilmember Purington, there would, I'm pointing out that there's physically parking on Denton Drive physically available, but that would not be counted in the required parking for the development.
Okay, I think I understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Owen.
Mac, you mentioned in your presentation that council can approve variances when they're consistent with a public benefit.
Yes.
But the staff memo doesn't address that at all. There's no analysis provided whatsoever as to why this variance would be to the public benefit. So could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the fundamental reason would be that on the west side of the street, you have up to, it's either 11 or 12 approaches, and on the east side, we would be recommending the 5. Perhaps that is better from a traffic standpoint because you have fewer points of access.
I thought you might say that, so I just wanted to challenge you a little bit on it. It's true, right, mathematically, that 5 is fewer than 11, but we're also talking about jamming 6 homes into each one of those, each one of which can have 2 off-street parking, and collectively, there's then 36 on-street parking slots, right? So even though we have fewer cuts, we have more vehicles. I don't know that lots of single-family homes, for example, have 6 or 12 vehicles in them. So more vehicles coming out of the cuts, so maybe fewer points of intersection, but more opportunity. I mean, there's just so many vehicles that are going to be jammed in there potentially. So help me think through why that would be in the public benefit, to put so many homes onto those little cuts.
I don't, in terms of, so many, I mean, now we're getting into how many folks are living there. I can't speculate on that.
But they have to have 2 off-street parking, right?
Correct.
And then you said 36 on collectively.
I'm just pointing out that there are 36 on the east side of the street that are physically there. Yes.
But if each house has to have 2 off-street, then that could be 12 per cut off-street, right?
Yes.
And that wouldn't be typical in a single-family home.
I might have to refer on the single family to
I just think, I think we're missing the fact that there's going to be a lot more vehicles, even if there are fewer points of intersection potentially, because of the number of houses versus a single-family home that would just have fewer vehicles.
Potentially on a volume base, but they're not all, obviously all occurring at one time.
Right.
So yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, further questions for Mac? This is a public hearing, so we will open up at some point for that. Any other questions? So factual questions. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of my questions were answered via email, but I want to follow up on a question I sent to Jennifer, just to clarify. Jennifer? Oh, she's not here. Monica, no, I'm sorry, it was Monica, wasn't it? Monica, sorry. I got it wrong.
Right the last time.
I know, I got it right the last time.
One time, right, is all I get?
Did I make a promise?
Yes.
I do owe you.
I'm going to take it personally one day. But how can I help you? Yeah, how can I help you,
Okay.
Councilmember Neese?
Okay, I emailed you later after you responded to me with the comments, and I wasn't quite sure if I fully understood where we were getting the additional units allowed in the N3 district, because as I read the ordinance, it was 65 feet minimum allowed with per principal building. And so, and I can't remember, we could probably count the numbers up there. It was quite a few of buildings up there. And so where are we getting that 65 feet per principal building to be able to, are we counting the driveways that are being cut in as well?
Yeah, the driveways contribute to the count as well. So that was actually the point of my second email that I sent, where I said, where it had the visual of like 4 houses on a street. And so when you just take a number of homes and times it by 65, that number isn't actually correct depending on how the street network lays. Because when you have houses, like imagine the sheet is the street. If you have houses here and you have houses here, you just need 65 feet of frontage somewhere to get you your number. So, that's how that number ultimately is less than 65 times 45.
So each of those homes have at least 65 feet of some, whether it's frontage on Denton or on those little drive cuts?
Correct.
Okay, yes. All right, thank you. That does help explain it.
And if I may just take the opportunity while I'm up here, in regards to, from a zoning perspective and thinking about public interest of the variance, the N3 zone has laid out minimum requirements. One of those minimum requirements being you need 65 feet of frontage per principal structure. So based on the layout that they've shown here, you know, when you say things like, there might be a lot of cars there. There wouldn't normally be a lot of cars there with just a single family home. Well, these are single family homes and they do have the street frontage that the zoning code has said for the benefit of public safety and welfare, you need a minimum of 65 feet of frontage. So the density is dictated by that frontage. So something to consider when you're weighing how it may be of interest to the public.
Okay, thank you. And a quick question for Mac, Mayor.
Go ahead, and then Councilor Boyette.
Mac, so there's, do you know how many units there were in there, in the development on the east side?
For both?
Oh. I'm sorry?
45, I believe.
45, okay. So if we were not to approve this, it would cut one of those out, or maybe possibly two, based upon the mayor's interpretation of the ordinance. And that would cut either 6 or 14, depending, because some of those pods have 6, some have 7 in there. So that would cut that many houses out of that. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes, unless they came up with another creative way, you know, with a different street layout.
Okay, so they could still develop the property as per court order with only 2 or 3 or 4 cuts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Boyette?
So Monica, don't run away. Not Jennifer, yeah. You know, we spent a couple, 2.5 years beating out this code, and you were there, yeah, 3. But it says right here in black and white, city code allows for 1 additional driveway for each additional 300 feet of frontage. It doesn't say 70 feet equals 1. How can we justify giving it a right of 1, cut for 70 feet when it says 300 feet is required?
Sure. Councilmember Boyette, we're talking about 2 separate regulations here. We're talking about the site development regulations, which have that language about the 1 additional per 300 or whatever. And then we have the zoning code. The zoning code is where it says you need 65 feet of frontage or lot width per principal structure. So all these regulations have to work together. So if you were to grant a variance for those additional curb cuts, it would not be contrary to the zoning requirement of having 65 feet of frontage. That's the point is lots of regulations apply to a single development, not just one. So we didn't get it wrong in recode by saying 1 per additional. That's a regulation that's been in place for a while and is not part of zoning. So I don't know if that's answering your question or if I just made it more confusing.
It just seems like we're missing the boat, and we want 300 feet, 70 isn't that way. Do we need to change the rules then?
I do not, Councilmember Boyette, I do not believe that we want 300 feet per every driveway. We're not asking for 300 feet of lot width.
No, but when you read this, it's confusing when even the mayor brought it up that 970 feet should only be 3, not 4.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, further discussion, well, actually, let's call it questions, because we don't have a motion on the floor yet, but Councilor Rustis, is that?
Monica, just real quick on that. If you had intended to make it be whole 300-foot segments, wouldn't you have said there are 2 allowable cuts for the first 900 feet instead of 600?
Councilmember Rupsis, that is not a zoning code requirement, and so I didn't have any
Okay, sorry.
point of drafting it. So site development regulations.
Wouldn't the site, I'm sorry. Then
I
maybe I should
apologize.
pass back. Wouldn't the site development requirements say, you would allow 2 cuts for the first 900 feet instead of 600 if you wanted full units of 300?
Yes.
I think it's not necessarily inconsistent because of that. Thanks.
Okay. Is there a motion or further questions? Councilmember Shaw.
I have a question for Monica. Sorry about that. Come back up, please, if you wouldn't mind. So am I understanding this correctly that 5 cuts, we can create significantly more density in this neighborhood versus fewer cuts, the developer doesn't have that same flexibility and would basically putting in fewer houses. Is that accurate?
Yes, Councilmember Shaw. So I would say one of the fundamental differences between the old zoning code and the new zoning code is the way that density can be established. Before, it was very cut and dry. You have X number of square feet. Every home requires X number of square feet. You just do the simple math, do the division, and you get the number. That is no longer the case now. It's very dynamic. What type of investment does a developer want to make into its street network? The more they're willing to invest in their street network, the more they're able to build density, because it's all based off of that frontage. So that's one of the things when we talk early with developers and they say, well, how many units can I get on this property? Well, what type of street network do you want to build? So it's a very dynamic number now.
Thank you.
Councilmember Owen?
Sorry, Mayor, for asking another question, but while you're here, are there other places in the community? It's very hard for me to visualize this many homes in this spot. I went up, I drove, I looked at the area. That's a lot of houses in this area. Are there other neighborhoods in Billings that have these itty bitty cuts with like 6 houses on them? Something that could help us kind of get a visual of how it looks? Do you know of where a variance like this has been granted?
I can't answer your question specifically and give you a name of a development. So what I'm actually going to share with you is just a little bit more abstract, in that like in our annexation policy, there's discussion about ideal density of a range of like at a minimum of 4 to 7 units per acre that comes in. This is an 8-acre parcel, and with 45 homes, you're looking at 5 homes per acre is the average. So it's really not that high. So I can give you that kind of just perspective, but I may need help. I don't know if you've got one.
So hang on just a second. I just have a quick follow-up. So when you give me the admonition that 65 foot of frontage is in the public interest, that's based on your assumption that density is in the public interest. Is that what you're telling me?
No,
Okay.
Councilmember Owen, I'm saying that the zoning code, the whole purpose of a zoning code and adopting a zoning code is really for the benefit of public health, welfare, and safety. And so the code has laid out to say, at a minimum for N3 zones, for these single family homes, you need to have a minimum of 65 feet of frontage. And based on what they're showing, they meet that 65 feet of frontage. So they're not doing something that is contrary to the zoning code. They're not asking for less frontage to make it more unsafe. So I'm saying, like, from a big picture of what zoning accomplishes by way of safety, they're maintaining it with the street network that they're proposing.
I see.
Okay, council, is there a motion or?
Public hearing.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yes, thank you. Very good. Let's move to the public hearing. So this is public hearing on item number 3. You've heard some of the preliminary discussion and questions. If you'd like to comment, please come forward. Tell us your name and address. Just ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Is there any public comment on item number 3?
I'm wondering
Sir, and please give us your name and address.
I didn't want to take up any more of my time. Anyway, I was wondering if the previous slide could come up here on the very first presentation by the city. There we are. It's bigger than what I have. My name is John Cutler, 2417 Denton Drive. I've been there for 17 and a half plus years. I have a question to Canal Vista. What advantage is your variance request to the remaining 75% of this subdivision? With normal lots, like it's shown here, that comes up to what I counted out, 79 lots. Since the court settlement that engineering brought up briefly, we're down to now 60 regular, normal, single family dwellings. With the new proposal that was mentioned, it was 25 patios added in. So I take 60 plus 45 is 105 homes now proposed. versus what this would be, 79. You guys are really good. You asked the same questions. You took away most of my points that I was going to bring up tonight. I also brought up the situation on the footage. Even Mayor brought up 901 would give you an extra cut. Doesn't seem quite fair to me, however. The thing I want to bring up here, in my point of view, I want to bring up you folks have received a packet, and what was previous to this picture here that was also shown, in WWC Engineering for Canal Vista had their engineering send a letter. It was dated June 21st. And what I want to refer to is the third paragraph about halfway down. I want to read it. As the CCRs, covenants, codes, and restrictions also required west of Denton Drive to remain as rigidly planted, the right-of-way for Denton Drive was kept in the original location. In turn, making short combined drives required as a second parallel road was not feasible. Due to these factors, a variance from the City of Billings Municipal Code is required. It's only required because what they lost in the court case, they're taking this amount of homes and now putting it into what you see here on the next page. They're taking this and, they're taking this and now putting it over here in a smaller area. Let me go on to the next page.
Sir, your time is up. Can you wrap it up?
Yes.
Just a final closing sentence or two.
The last paragraph in WWC's letter, it says, and engineering touched up on that, was that we're reducing from 13 cuts to 5. We're comparing apples to oranges, folks. This situation goes right back. He mentions 13. The 13 lots that he's talking about are on the far east side there. 13 homes is 13 cuts. What he's doing here, if you take that same amount of area here, he's adding 29 homes. So I rest my case. This is the best that I can do, and I appeal for your no vote on this. It's nothing more than trying to get what they lost back over on a smaller area. And we've heard of court packing. This is subdivision packing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Further public comment on this public hearing on item number 3.
Name's Kent Richmond, 2420 Denton Drive. I've been there about 18 years right now. Number one, I'd like to remind you of the opening paragraph of the application. The city council may grant a variance. Now, that does not mean that you have to grant a variance. Now, next thing, I copied off these 3 pages. Page 3 is what the original plat was supposed to be, and they modified that in 2008. I think they had one reading at the council, and then they pulled their plans because the economy shut down and it wasn't feasible to develop it at that time. The second page is what we had, the canal Vista subdivision with the two roads that were split. And want to stress that there were a lot of areas, there was drainage concern and everything, where all the water was going. And I don't know what they've done now with it, but I don't see where that's been taken into account. And third, about that public approach, or that fifth approach, if they eliminated that, they could reduce the density by maybe 7 units. Instead of 45 on that area right there, they would have maybe 38. Now, that's still a lot more units than were on the original plat. They've got 45 proposed right now, plus the 12 lots, the full-size lots, and now the engineer had talked to my wife and told us that according to the N3 zoning, that they could put 10 additional units on there, which would have been 55. And, you know, where would you stick them? You've got 2 lots on the east side of Ditton Drive that are kind of a swamp area right now, and I think they're calling for that to be part of the retaining water deal, but I hope that it doesn't turn out like that pond up there on Annandale and River Oaks, where it's just a fenced-off area with high reeds. It looks like hell. That's a residential neighborhood or area. And, you know, I just don't believe they need that additional access. You know, they can cut down. It's never a good idea to overcrowd a subdivision, and that's exactly what they're doing. And the other thing is, trash day, what do we have? We have...
And Mr. Richardman, your time is up, but if you want to make that final point quickly.
Yeah, we have from either 7 to 14 trash cans on every one of those things. And it just ruins our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further public comment in this public hearing on item number 3? Yeah, including anybody online? No.
Mayor and Council, Greg Reed, WWC Engineering agent for this. Real quickly, clarification, do I stick to the 3 minutes, or I'm assuming I'm going to be up here for questions longer?
Why don't you take your 3 minutes, and then we'll ask some questions for you if we've got them.
Okay, so I'll just quickly hit on points. As part of this project, the owner does not wish to come up and speak tonight. With the length of it and the back and forth, it's become very emotional. So I will be answering any questions regarding the project's behalf. And I want to hit on a couple of things. So important details from a practical perspective, doing the curb cuts as we are doing them this way, in lieu of having roads that would allow stormwater to pass down, the public roadway that'll be higher in elevation than the lower private streets will now pass stormwater down to the pond that's located down at the bottom of the hill. Secondly, the variance is for 5 curb cuts, which, as being noted, council belief is 3, not 4, but I would like to make the point, it's not a lot more, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Opposite side of the road, there's 11 lots owned by the current developers, 1 lot immediately south of it that is owned by Mr. Richmond, and if you count Lake Heights Drive that's directly across from one of them, makes 13 equivalent roadways to the west, where we are discussing having 5. Last item, it's compliant with zoning, albeit if you were to count the full length of all of the curb all the way through it, we could have more units in there than the 65. As Monica noted, This is between 5 and 6 per acre. As discussed before, it could be 4 to 7 per acre. So this isn't incredibly dense. And the reason for that is the CCRs have minimum square footage, 2-car garage. So if there weren't CCRs underlying the property that required this footprint, maybe the footprints could be a little bit smaller. In addition, I want to hit on a precedence perspective, which I don't know the best way to hand these out. So in comparison to this project, I looked around on County GIS and I checked for other similar projects. I found, I believe, 18 listed here. If you go through the list, Canal Vista proposed with the 978 feet and 5 curb cuts, I believe is the least, or I guess most linear foot of frontage per curb cut. There's some of them in here that I believe are up to 16 curb cuts for 1,200 feet, 15 for 1,100, 12 for 630. So this project does occur a lot around town. There's a lot of similar projects that lead to precedence for this. Maybe it's a surprise to you and you're not used to it, but I just want to bring that up and make it clear that this is, when you go to a master site plan, patio home project, you have a limited frontage, you're going to end up with more curb cuts, you end up at this variance. The last thing I want to note, the attorney for the developers, when I was unable to make it, I believe they sent a email with a letter attached. There's one specific note in there I want to point out, just so that it doesn't appear as though this is a surprise, wasn't discussed. During the negotiations or during the mediation as part of the lawsuit, this layout with more units on it was presented, and it was presented as though this is the option that the owners are moving to if they have to go back to putting the lots on the west side, putting Denton back as it were, and then going with the new N3 zoning per recode. So that was presented in October of 2020. So I just want to make it clear that this is not a new layout. This is the layout that was presented last October and has been worked on to this point. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. And before we do that, Greg, I'm just going to see if there's any other public comment on this item, and we can come back. Any other public comment in this public hearing on item number 3? Okay, we'll close the public hearing then, and back to staff for questions or motions. Okay, Councilmember Purington and Boyette, Owen.
Thank you. And I may be stealing Councilmember Boyette's thunder, but so the retention pond that's on this map.
Correct.
That's right across from where it says drive, Denton Drive, that's the retention pond. And so my question has to do with the drainage, as well as it backs up to the BBWA, which, you know, we've had issues with BBWA.
And 5 houses.
Oh, and 5 houses. So I think it was to the point to the one gentleman that said, you know, it's in a swamp area. I don't know that it is because I haven't driven out there. But I'm concerned about the retention pond on these homes in the lower portion of the subdivision, Artisan, I guess it's a Arstine, Canal Lane, and then the BBWA. So I guess, have you mitigated any issues that you see with the canal and that storm drainage with homes being built right in that area?
And you're referring to the concerns with slope movement related to the BBWA on projects that are constructed near it. Mm-hmm. Yes, we have addressed that. There's many more retention ponds than the one that you're referring to. There's actually 5 in total along there. There's 2 points that it actually collects water and discharges them. And those 2 points are set at an elevation to have groundwater make them a wet pond and then allow the spillover. So with that, it's effectively not saturating the hillside any more than it would have originally. It's the groundwater that's within that area that is going to be in the ponds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Boyette. No one?
No, thank you.
You're okay. Councilor Owen, did you have your hand up?
Mayor, I'm ready to make a motion if there are no further questions.
Okay.
Okay. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to reject the request for a variance to Site Development Ordinance BMCC Section 6-1208H5.
Second.
Okay.
If I could speak to the motion.
Second by Councilmember Neese. If you'd like to speak to your motion, Councilmember Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor. The request in front of council tonight is to grant a variance to the site development ordinance. So as I understand, based on staff presentation, the question is not, do we have private drives or single-family homes with driveways? That is their right under the code. The question is, do we have 4 or 5? And I've not seen any evidence presented in any presentation tonight that it's in the public interest to go from 4 to 5. There's no basis to suggest that somehow the public is better off if there are 4 cuts or 5 cuts. I get the argument that is being made that these private drives have fewer points than a bunch of single-family home driveways, but that's not the question in front of council tonight. The question is 4 versus 5, or as the mayor suggests, maybe 3 versus 4. But the point is, there's absolutely no evidence in any record that it's in the public interest to grant a variance and allow more of these cuts. So because I don't see any evidence, I don't see any record established, I'm going to oppose this, and I would ask council to reject it as well.
Okay, further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Triki?
I did want to point out that I have family that lives in this and owns property in this development, but I will not be recusing myself. I just want it on record. I did want to say that to me, the most important reason for doing this is that we are in a housing shortage crisis, and the more smaller, less expensive homes that we can build around the city, the better. And adding 1 curb to this will add something like 5 or 6 of those houses in the city. So to me, that is a public benefit.
Thank you very much. Further discussion, Councilmember Gulick?
Yeah, I guess along similar lines, I will not support the motion because I think there is a benefit to having housing diversity and having more housing. My future in-laws also live in patio homes similar to what's being proposed here. They don't want to be able to take care of a whole yard themselves. It's a form of housing that is needed by an aging portion of our community. They're very well kept houses. I'd love to have them as neighbors. Maybe not my in-laws, but yeah, I won't go into. Anyhow, I think there is a public benefit, and also there's I think it's a benefit to all taxpayers as well in terms of having more housing to support the infrastructure we have as well. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Jennifer stated it well, but I also live over the hill from there. I'm in that, I know this neighborhood well. This is my neighborhood. And when we talk about development, I've said this before, we need to look at the characteristics of the neighborhood. I agree. I think we need choices of homes. And I think what these patio homes going in there will be a choice of a home there that will allow people who don't want that full-size house to have a nice little patio home. And they can develop those even without the additional curb cuts and without this variance. So I don't think we're going to stop them from developing patio homes. We're going to give them this choice of, Danny, like you said, of lower cost homes. It's just there won't be as many in there. They won't have as many curb cuts. You won't have as much traffic going through those curb cuts as there would be under a plan of having this. So I think that I think this. Denying this doesn't impede the property owner from developing the property and providing good quality patio homes in the area, as was even mentioned in the CCRs when they first developed this, that they would have patio homes in that area. So I think us denying this will continue to have this area developed, and I look forward for us really to help support this neighborhood, really retain the characteristics of their neighborhood.
Thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think on my time at Council, I haven't voted against housing, and I'm going to say it for now maybe the 20,000th time. I beg your pardon that you have to listen to it. The City of Billings does not build housing. We rely on private industry and private money to bring forward development to us, and then we have that opportunity to say yes or no to it. We do not have millions of dollars in a bank account to build housing. part of my job, I really feel, is problem solving. And here we have a development that doesn't seem to be really increasing density, but it does have an opportunity to build housing inventory. The only way that we can impact housing shortages and the cost of housing in this community is to impact the inventory. If we say no to housing, we're saying no to more housing that increases the price and decreases the amount of people that can be housed. I have never said no to housing. I'm not going to say no to housing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Councilmember Purington?
Generally speaking, I would always side with the free market and what it does for our community in the investment. I think the difficult position that council is in many times is when you have established neighborhoods and that expectation of housing. And I know there was something even on the West End. And because the expectation of an existing neighborhood and what was going to be put just across the road was something that I thought was very telling. I guess the most telling thing for me at this point is there's not that much outcry from other individuals. We've had two individuals that have stated their position, and I know that the mix of patio homes with in 3 zoning works well. It looks nice, and it does provide additional housing. So I guess my biggest hang up with this particular one is that we've only heard from 2 homeowners in that area. I'm not concerned that there's 1 additional curb cut. Staff doesn't seem to have a problem with it. And I do think that regulations do play a big part in the housing strategy that really council doesn't, we don't define that so much other than through our regulations. So at this point, I probably would just go ahead and vote against your proposal, Councilmember Owen, because there hasn't been that much of an outcry from the neighbors in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Purington. I'll comment, and then Councilmember Ripsis. I'm going to vote in opposition if this motion passes, though I would recommend that if there's motion in favor, that it specify 5 curb cuts rather than just 1 and leave some ambiguity as to how many the total would be. But as for this, Councilmember Owen makes a good point. Well, what's the public benefit? And I guess the flip side of that argument is what's the harm of additional curb cuts? Quite clearly, the objection here is not to curb cuts, it's to the density of the number of units. And that's not what we're being asked to decide, at least technically. When it comes to that density, this is a backdoor way to oppose that. But I think we know that these densities are not unusual in our community. They're also consistent with our zoning regulations, the 65 limit or 65-foot requirement. And so I don't think they're out of the ordinary. More specifically, though, on public benefit, I think protecting personal property rights and the property owners' right to develop their property is very important. And in this case, their intentions have been clear for 20 years. Paragraph 23 of the covenant says the blocks 62 and 65 may be further subdivided, replatted, and rezoned for a planned development or a patio home project in that block pursuant to the Montana Unit Ownership Act. So sure, there could be debate about how much density, but there's been no doubt that that's proper. Developer had a misstep when they tried to develop outside those blocks, but in these cases, it's pretty clear, I think. There's also a public benefit, I think, if you spread out the number of cars coming onto it, because imagine if you're a property owner right on the other side, you could have 1 and you'd be really severely harmed just by having to look at all that traffic. By spreading it out, there's some benefit to people across the street. It also is the question of who's the public. People in the northwest part of Billings don't care. The most impacted people, of course, are on the other side of the street. And who's that public? Well, if I got Greg's comments correctly, 11 out of the 13 are in favor of this because their own down by the developer, not surprisingly. And that doesn't mean that the objections of the two existing neighbors aren't understandable, but if that's the measure of what the public is, then it's not a close call. And then the housing shortage point, I think, is a perfectly legitimate one. So, Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm a little concerned if this motion doesn't pass, then we're going to have to go through all the machinations of a new motion. So I'm just going to offer a substitute motion right now to approve the resolution. And I'm sorry, I should have had it pulled up. So the substituted motion would be having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve a variance to site development ordinance BMCC section 6-1208H5 as recommended by staff.
Councilmember Ripsis, I just ask if is it truly as recommended by staff, or is it for a specific number of curb cuts?
I'm sorry, yes, to allow for 5 curb cuts as intended and recommended by staff, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Shaw.
And then.
And now discussion on the motion. Do you want to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I'm just going to, I waver on this because I think there's a reason we have rules. And to me, this sheet where we've got 18 different variations or variances that we've allowed over the years to different townhome and condo patio home units, it doesn't really speak to consistency of having rules. Why have them if we're just going to pass a variance every time? On the other hand, I think if we don't approve this variance, the developer is going to get a little creative and find a way to squeeze, 5 extra patio homes on there using some type of different, internal road structure, driveway structure. Instead of, at 5, he'll do it with 4, and it'll happen. So we might lose, a couple homes, but it's not going to be 7. There's really no benefit to forcing the 5 in this case. So I'm in favor of allowing the 5. I do think that is what is intended based on how the code is written. There normally would be 4. I think that's actually the way we would read that. So I don't have that concern about it. But I do coming down on the side of favoring the variance.
Thank you very much. Discussion now on the motion. Councilmember Shaw, you had the second, and then Councilmember Owen.
Thank you. So I won't belabor. I agree with a lot of the comments of things people have already said. I support, obviously, the 5 curb cuts. Just 2 quick comments that I feel like haven't really been addressed. And one is that neighborhoods are dynamic. They're not static things that stay that way forever, in decades long. I think if you look at some of the historical neighborhoods in Billings, you will find houses that were apartment buildings and are now houses, or were businesses and are now houses again, and that's just kind of a revolving door. So I think that that's an important point. And the second one is that a few more houses is going to enable the cost of those houses to be a little bit less per each one. And in the quest of achieving some kind of movement on affordable housing in Billings, I really can't see saying no to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Rowan.
Thanks, Mayor, and I won't belabor this either. I appreciate what you're saying about the reason there's rules. In fact, I think most of Project Recode was predicated on the idea that we're trying to get away from variances. I actually am not trying to backdoor a density argument. I live in a neighborhood that's very mixed development. I think it's fine. It doesn't bother me. What bothers me is the lack of established record. As council members have talked, we've sort of haphazardly said, oh, housing is important and we care about that, and that's great. But if we're going to make a finding that a variance serves the public interest, there should be more data and analysis. And there's just not. And this is a consistent concern of mine, that council is asked to make findings and there's not enough data or analysis or support to it. So my concern is that we just didn't have a record here. I still think we haven't shown why 4 is better than 5, or why 5 is better than 4. So I'm going to continue to oppose this variance request. But I'm concerned that we don't do a very thorough job of establishing a public record before we make findings. And so for that reason, I'm going to continue to oppose.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I think when we look at this, Mayor, I agree, Tom. We shouldn't have this many variances. Now, why each of these projects are all different? We'd have to take time to look at this, and I think that's what the staff should be making sure that our code is written so that we don't have to have variances. And so I think that when we look at this, we're looking at, 12 to 14 more houses, because if you look at the ordinances the mayor brought up, it should be 3 curb cuts, not 5. And so we're adding 2 curb cuts, 6 to 7 homes per curb cut. And it is whether we want it or not, it is a density question, because the developer is asking for the curb cuts, because if they weren't asking for the curb cuts, it wouldn't be a density question. They wouldn't be putting those in there. So I think that whether we want to address this as density or not, I think we need to look at this as, what are we doing to this neighborhood? How are we impacting this neighborhood? And as we have in the past, how do we look and how do we consider other neighborhoods? We don't take into consideration what these other neighbors have put into their properties over the years when developers come in and ask to higher density. I agree, it's going to bring more homes in there. It's going to bring some of the costs down. It's going to be much more profitability for the developers. And we are in a housing crisis, but this isn't going to solve it, whether we have a few more homes. And so I think we really need to listen to when we talk about the neighborhoods, look at them and find out what they are. Whether it's a density question or not, I think our codes need to be changed to address this, whether we're going to allow all of this N3 development into a smaller subdivision. So I will continue to oppose this.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilmember Purington.
Well, just one comment, and I think Monica said it best, is that whenever we keep talking about changing our codes or whatever, because she's talking about site development, I believe, in this part of that, not the zoning. Her zoning is pretty well established, but we're talking site development, and that's different. The variance is for the site development, not for the zoning. So I think there is a difference. And Jennifer, I do agree with you. There's a lot of things that do come up, and we're learning on the fly. So I look forward to more of our lessons, if you will, but they may be a little too late for some. But I mean, that's where I'm listening. I'm not listening to the zoning part. I am listening to that site development part. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilor, we're prepared to vote. Okay, we'll do that. I'll just kind of, for trying to correct the record for my own benefit, I did not hear that this list was a list of variances. Maybe that was said and I missed it. I apologize. But if that was not said, then it might have been that these were in the county and then they were brought into the city. It might have been that they were approved without a variance when the regulations were different or something like that. I do not know. Only one specifically references a city variance. That's the one at the bottom, Twin Pines Townhome. So I just don't know what the total significance of that list is. So, and I would certainly recommend that our staff try to clarify the calculation process for curb cuts. That no reason not to be crystal clear about that. Okay, the motion then is Councilmember Ripsis's motion for approval of 5 curb cuts, otherwise consistent with the staff recommendation. We'll do a hand vote. If in favor of the motion for approval, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are Councilmembers Shaw, Gulick, Joy, Cole, Tariki, Purington, Boyette, and Ripsis. If voting in opposition, Council Members Neese and Owen. The motion passes. Thank you very much. That concludes that concludes the first item 3, but there's still the issue of the easements. Council, at 7:40, do you want to move on to the variances or do you want to take a brief break?
Could I just make a motion for the...
I don't think it'll take long.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So as long as, and if you need to take a break, you can just take a break. But okay, let's try to wrap this item up before we take a break. Mac, you had the presentation of the variances. Okay. I'm sorry, of the easements from the consent agenda. Councilor Chris?
Mayor and Council, there was no planned presentation. It was on consent. I think the memo covers everything. We're here to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I move to approve consent agenda item, what was formerly consent agenda item L, stormwater and sanitary sewer easements with Canal Vista LLC for maintenance in Lake Hills subdivision.
Okay. Motions for approval. Councilmember Boyette has the second. Is there any discussion or questions for staff? Again, it is in your packet. It's these stormwater and sewer easements. Any further discussion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes, I believe, with only Councilmember Neese voting in opposition. So that concludes that.
I didn't know.
Yeah, there was a fly for anybody. Councilmember Owen was not trying to slap anybody. So thank you very much. Council will take a break at 7:43. We'll be back, start up at 7:50 or no, not later. Okay, it's 7:52. Apologize for the 2-minute late start. We're on item number 4. Tony, would you read item number 4?
Item number 4, public hearing and first reading ordinance, amending ordinance 21-5811, zone change 1015. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Monica?
Okay, council, I don't have much of a presentation, but I want to take the opportunity to stand up here and be accountable for the error. And 2, I want to let you know that we believe that we have identified our resources that we use for our mapping to get our legal descriptions at the time that applications come in and what the county GIS is using are conflicting. And that's a part of what this problem really relates to, because I want to give you the heads up, there's another correction that's coming as well for the very same reason. And it's because there are filings that are shown differently depending on the source. And so it's not to stand up here and give you an excuse, but it is to say that, like, now that we have at least identified where the conflicting information is coming from, hopefully we can avoid these in the future. So with that being said, very, very simple change. I have no further presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Monica. I'll start with a question. I apologize. I gave everybody else a copy of an email that I sent at 4:02. Do you have this, or did you?
I've got it on my email. I read it, and I even replied back and said, planning staff, I didn't want to speak for Gina. Planning staff has no problem with it. Whatever, if you make an amendment, we'll see that it gets in the second reading ordinance.
Okay, and for anybody who might be listening and curious what this deals with, it was proposed language adding at the end of Section 5 repealer, language that says all resolutions, ordinances, sections of the city code inconsistent herewith are hereby repealed. And then add, including ordinance 22-581, approved on second reading June 13, 2022, which was intended to accomplish this zoning map amendment, but included an incorrect legal description of the subject property referencing Emma Jean Heights subdivision first filing instead of Emma Jean subdivision second filing. The reason for adding that was, even though it might technically not be essential, that way the old ordinance, it's very clear that that has gone away. So anybody who's kind of researching this understands why there's 2 ordinances floating around out there. So that was the purpose of that, if council so sees fit. So thank you very much. Questions for Monica on this item? Are there any? This is a public hearing. Okay, I don't see any questions. So we'll open it for public hearing. This is item number 4 to correct the old zoning ordinance that we approved last month. Is there any public comment on item number 4? Don't see any, so, and nothing is online, so we'll close the public comment period. Public hearing on item number 4. Council, how would you like to proceed? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve and amend ordinance 21-5811, zone change 1015, on first reading as recommended by staff.
Councilmember Boyette, can I just ask you what your intention is with regard to my amendments? We can get your motion on the floor.
Also to include the last paragraph of your email.
Okay. All right. And the clerk has a copy of that. Councilmember Boyette, is that your second?
Yes. No, Councilmember Parrington.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Boyette, Councilmember Parrington. You have the second. Councilmember Neese and I have been spending too much time together or something like that. Okay, very good. So we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Councilor, you're prepared to vote? Okay, so if in favor of the motion for approval with that change to include the language in my email of 4:02 today that was distributed and which I read into the record, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. That motion passes. It concludes item number 4. Bring us to item number 5, McCall Development Property. Tony, would you read item 5A?
Item 5A, McCall.
Which is, I apologize, I guess technically it's been renumbered now because we added that one in. It's really 6A, I guess.
Public hearing and resolution for annexation 22-06, a parcel located north of Elysian Road, south of Titan Avenue, and west of Maloney Lane. Staff recommends conditional approval. Action, approval, or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Monica.
Back again. Okay, Mayor and Council, before you have a petition for the annexation of some already developed property. Tonight, there is no joint hearing, no zone change associated with this parcel. There is an annexation agreement and there is a ward boundary ordinance. The annexation agreement and the ward boundary ordinance don't have presentations associated with them, but the ward is Ward 3 for the ward boundary ordinance. So with that, we'll get right in to the request at hand. So this is the exhibit for the resolution. This is one parcel right here located at Titan Avenue and Maloney Lane. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's the McCall Homes building as well as Brittany's Dream. It is zoned heavy, or excuse me, it is in the red area for the limits of annexation map. As you can see, the Maloney right-of-way is in the city, and so it is adjacent to city limits on both Elysian and Maloney. This is an aerial of the property, so you can see it's already built out. And here's a zoning map. It's presently zoned heavy commercial, and the development is in conformance with that zoning district. And just a little bit further out aerial view for you. So here are some photos of the subject property. This is at the intersection of Titan and Maloney, looking southwest. This is the subject property looking west along Titan Avenue. A little bit more zoomed out perspective just so you can see the more industrial type buildings to the north. This is the existing facility. And this would be looking from basically the posting location across Maloney. And this would be looking south along Maloney. So the annexation policy criteria is pretty limited. It is located in the red area. The city departments have reviewed the parcel, and existing services are well established within the area. They are required to provide a waiver of right to protest as a part of the annexation and the annexation agreement. And of course, any future development must be done in compliance with zoning. So pretty straightforward tonight, not a lot of what ifs. There is a staff recommendation of conditional approval. That conditional approval is related to the annexation agreement. And ultimately, after you hold a public hearing, if you decide to deny the request for annexation, you wouldn't be able to consider the annexation agreement. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Questions for Monica? Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you. Could you remind us what they can put in there if we do this CX heavy commercial, what is allowed? Because they're not going to keep the building the way it is. What purposes can they use for CX heavy commercial?
Oh, I believe that they fully intend to keep the building the way that it is. McCall Homes office for their construction businesses there, as well as a nonprofit called Brittany's Dream. So they're needing it to have, the reason why they're annexing is not to change the use, but it's to have access to city services like septic and water.
But what could they do with it?
They could have a variety of things in heavy commercial. You could have anything from professional offices to gas stations, to warehousing, anything in between. But their businesses that they currently have established are also allowable. Sure.
Thank you very much. Other questions for Monica? Any other questions for Monica? Okay, we'll open it for public hearing on item now 6A, resolution for annexation 2206. Is there any public comment or presentation or comments by our developer? no obligation, but if you would like to, you're welcome to. Brad?
I'm Brad McCall with McCall Development. The primary reason for this was that our septic system is failing. And we're immediately adjacent to city services, and we would love to have the services if that works.
Sounds like we got you over a barrel.
Kinda.
Or at least over a sewer tank.
Yeah, kind of like that. It's a little bit like that, you know. Well, like it's in the thing that we're going to give, you know, with the Maloney widening, we're going to give that right away for that, which is fine, versus having to buy the right away that however many square feet that is. So,
okay, thank you. Any questions for Brad? Okay, thank you. Any other public comment on item 6A? No, so we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, I move to conditionally approve annexation 22-06 as recommended by staff.
Second.
Motion made, seconded by Councilmember Neese. Any discussion now on the motion? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm very happy to hear that those little pieces are coming, well, that piece of it is coming into the city. As the improvements are going to happen on Maloney Lane, that's not a good place for pedestrians. You walk in the ditch or you walk on the road. So I'm really looking forward to that being more accessible for pedestrian and bicyclists. So this is a good deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comment on the motion? Any further discussion? Before we proceed to vote? Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. Item number 6A now. Resolution annexation 2206. If in favor of the motion for approval, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. The annexation agreement then is the next item, 6B. Monica, do you have, our agenda says no further presentation. Okay, so back to council. Council, is there a motion or questions for staff or the developer, Councilmember Gulick?
I move to approve the annexation agreement with McCall Properties LLC and Brittany's Dream LLC as recommended by staff.
Second.
I apologize. Did Tony read it into the record?
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, we should. Pretend that never happened. And Tony, would you read item 6B?
Annexation agreement with McCall Properties LLC and Brittany's Dream LLC. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. We'll do that again. Councilmember Gulick.
I move to approve the annexation agreement with McCall Properties LLC and Brittany's Dream LLC as recommended by staff.
And second.
It's good to see you haven't changed your mind in the meantime. So the discussion now on the annexation agreement. Is there any discussion on the annexation agreement? Okay, if not, if in favor of approval, item 6B, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Item 6C. Tony, would you read item 6C?
Public hearing and first reading ordinance expanding the boundaries of Ward 3 to include recently annexed property in annexation 2206, a parcel located north of Elysian Road, south of Titan Avenue, and west of Maloney Lane. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm assuming no further presentation, Monica? No. So we'll open up for public hearing. This is a public hearing. Anybody like to comment on item 6C? Seeing no one, public hearing is closed on item 6C. Council, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, I move to approve the first reading ordinance expanding the boundaries of Ward 3 as recommended by staff.
Thank you. Councilmember Tricky, would you like to have the honor of expanding your domain? Okay. Discussion on the motion for approval? None. So if in favor of the motion to add this property to Ward 3, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Brings us to new item 7. Tony, would you read item 7?
tax increment financing assistant from Downtown Urban Renewal District for reimbursement of qualified improvements for renovations at 2520 First Avenue North to the Widmeyer Corporation, Lincoln Apartments, up to a maximum of $250,000. Downtown Billings Partnership Board recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of DBP Board recommendation.
Matt is bringing up the PowerPoint, and our presenter is Mehmet Casey.
Yes. Let's see. Perfect. All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you so much for your time today. Yes, Mehmet Casey with the Downtown Billings Partnership, and tonight's presentation is on the what will be known as the Lincoln Apartments, but what we've known as of recently or for many years as the Montana Rescue Mission Women's Shelter. So that's the property currently as it stands in the picture. And I did a little bit of sort of digging. There we go. On the building's history, consulting the Western Heritage Center, the building was built in 1916. I think their records indicate that the hotel opened either in late of 1917 or early 1918. But as you'll see from these pictures, at any time they had a series of sort of businesses that were operating out of that corner, the northwest corner of the building, while the hotel was in place. And so these are some of the names of the businesses that occupied that corner in the past. And then a few more pictures of the building. But then according to their records, in 1987, the hotel closed due to back taxes. Then it's not quite clear. I've done some more asking around the community to see when the shelter moved in, but that's sort of the next record we have. So there might have been a period where the building was vacant or closed until it was acquired by the Montana Rescue Mission. Now, obviously, as we know, is acquired by the Widmeyer Corporation, and that's the subject of our presentation tonight. So the new project, the second and third floor already have existing units and are pretty much operational and functional as is, but then throughout time and as circumstances allow, with as little disruptions to the tenants as possible, the new owners will continue to improve upon the conditions of those units in terms of energy efficiency upgrades and things like that. So in those two floors, there are already 23 apartments. The primary focus of the construction and the request is focusing on the ground level, where we're adding 5 apartments with, as you can see in the renderings, recessed entries that used to be there, and they've been covered since then. So these are going to be individual patios for these tenants, where you'll have more sort of presence of folks that can be sitting on their patio, enjoying the outdoors, but also providing more eyes on the street, which is a very tangible crime prevention through environmental design element. And then obviously there would be an entrance in the middle that goes upstairs. And then the corner will go back to a fashion of a business, whether it's retail or restaurant. It looks like both types have been in there before. So it's set up if you need ventilation for a restaurant, you can do that. If you just want to do retail, you can do that. And so that's, in a nutshell, the project that we're going to be looking at supporting. And with that, there's the breakdown of the items. They're predominantly under MCA 4288. They're also mostly focusing on the exterior components of that building, the work that's going to be happening at the ground level, with a few energy efficiency enhancements that are connecting to the main grid and brain of the mechanics of the building. That's under utilities, the plumbing, electrical, and HVAC, but not necessarily contributing to the individual units that are going in there, because that's interior work that the private sector is taking care of. And then here are the numbers, the updated and corrected numbers since the email this morning. Thank you again for capturing that. This is still a quick or a recent formula that we're working on. This is the second time we've used it, based on your request to be more uniform with the S-bird and the E-bird. So we're making it work. And these are the projections. Again, these are estimates on what we foresee the project in terms of future value and then potential ROI on that project based on the award size that we're considering. So merits, again, per usual, we look at our urban renewal plan and our DBA strategic plan, the MCA, the city TIF policy. While the 23 residential units are being activated, and as you recall, these were not available to the public, they were part of the shelter, now they are available. They're, again, it's a nice addition to the downtown, but it's not the primary focus of our presentation tonight, because again, the award is focusing on the ground level work. And the upstairs is mainly taken care of by the private owners. But this could also potentially spur further development in the surrounding area. As you recall, in March of 2020, you saw a presentation by Clock Tower across the street from it. In February of this year, you saw the Griffin project, 2 blocks east of it. So there's already activity complementary to this in the neighborhood, and now this is the third activity. So it's another way of also complementing our growth and our need for housing. And then with that, the DBP recommendation is to award up to $250,000. Also, and 5 reimbursements of $50,000 a year in following fiscal years after the project is completed. And then the developer must sign a development agreement. That's standard with all of our applications. And with that, I'll open up to questions, and I do have the applicant with me here too, if you have any specific questions for him.
Very good, thank you very much. And questions for Mehmet, Councilor Puritan.
Thanks, Mehmet. So to understand this, with the $250,000 the TIF money would go for, it would be for 5 apartments and 1 business. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is there plans for expansion of business property, commercial property right there?
The corner, you mean? Like that could potentially?
So that whole front that faces First Avenue, those are all the apartments? Is that all apartments right there?
Yeah, so this right here is an apartment. This would be another unit. This would be another unit. This is the entrance to upstairs. And then the corner right here, that entrance to the corner would be the business.
So when you're figuring up taxable value, are those apartments that are on the ground floor, are those rental units or are those?
Rental, yes.
Rental?
Yep.
Okay, so the whole thing is commercial, basically. It's based on commercial.
Yeah, the
living
residents
space
and the business, it's all rental units. The upstairs is rentals as well.
And one more question right now, Mr. Mayor. So the 23 apartments that are above, it's been many, many, many years since I've been in there. But those are, whatever you call them units, are they actually, have their own restroom, have their own kitchen area within those units? Or
it's been a while for me as well. I may lean on the applicant here to answer that question.
Mr. Widmer, please come forward. Welcome to Billings.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Upstairs in those 23 units, there are some units that we don't have rented right now, majority of them, that are the bathroom down the hall situation. We plan on eventually having every one of those units on the 2nd and 3rd floor being self-contained, meaning having their own kitchen and their own bathroom. We felt that it was important first to do the main level, because that area was what you'd call functionally obsolete, right? The back area where we're adding the 5 apartments, there really wasn't a lot of use for that. There was limited commercial use. We did see some potential for the corner there, so we felt that it was important to complete the main level, to get the main level active and rented, and then move forward from there in upgrading those single room into self-contained units with the kitchen and bathroom.
So just, since we have, with those units up above in the second and third floor, I would imagine that those would rent for, what sort of price range are those renting for?
They currently are in the 500 to 700 range, depending on size. I mean, there's some larger units up there. This building is intended to what I call to be workforce housing, meaning to be affordable to all the people that work downtown, because it's favorable to have a lot of your workforce to live downtown. So our intent is for that building to be workforce housing.
And I think it was this one that the ground level, those were renting for, what was it, $850? Is that the same project?
Right, and and that number is based upon, I'm sure that you've all seen that you want to keep the housing costs about 1/3, 33%, and anyone that exceeds that, you deem those to be housing challenged. And so in the $800 to $850 range, that's about $15 an hour. Where I'm from in Coeur d'Alene, and I don't know what the minimum wage is in Montana, but our minimum wage in Idaho is $7.25. But there isn't anyone that pays $7.25. It's almost like in North Idaho, our minimum wage is about $15 an hour. Not stated, but that's the market. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Mehmet, were you done? Steve, why don't you stay in the vicinity, because I'm sure we're going to have some questions. But before we do, Mehmet, do you have more to your presentation? No, that's okay. Okay, Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. I do have a question for you, Steve. Can you talk to us a little bit about, first of all, love the proposal. Workforce housing is so needed downtown. I think this is a great use for the building. I really like the activation on the first floor, bringing the business back. All of that's great. Can you talk to us a little bit about the safety for the ground floor apartments and having that patio access? I'm just kind of curious what you guys are planning with that. I just can see, people being a little bit nervous about living on the ground floor on a busy street downtown.
I would anticipate, and we don't have all of the final drawings yet, majority of all of it is complete, but I would anticipate that any entrance to that would have a gate on it, and then the tenant would use a key to access that. Now, that doesn't prevent someone from jumping over the top of the gate, right? We would hope that doesn't happen, but I would imagine that every entrance would have a gate to get into your front porch, as well as the plan is for that area to be very well lit.
Thank you. And then, so just, that sounds great. A follow-up on that. Is there an entrance then to the apartments from the street? So would you be able to go in through the gate to the patio and then get into the apartment that way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think I have a floor map right here.
Can you walk us through that, either Steve or Mehmet?
On this corner, this is the business. And then I believe this is an apartment unit.
Yes.
And then this is an entrance that goes upstairs.
Right.
And then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more. So you've got 4 here, 5, and then the entrance to upstairs, and then the business here.
So the main entrance to the apartment will be off the street, and then all of the others will enter the upstairs, second and third floor. They enter through right there next to that one unit to go upstairs. Okay. One good thing about this building is that because it was the mission and they were required to meet so many standards, federal standards, is that functional wise, it's sprinkled, there's a lot of other features, and so it had been a very well maintained and upgraded building. So it's not, the second and third levels are not at all dilapidated. They are well-kept units. It just happened that some of the style of the units with the single room only is not something that we would like to see. We'd like to have some self-contained units.
Thank you. Councilor Boyette?
Thank you. Can you discuss anything about parking of cars?
Well, the one thing that when we first visited Billings is that we think that downtown Billings has outstanding parking. And there's a lot of parking garages, there's a lot of on-street parking, so there isn't a parking lot for that building. I think you'll find that some of the people that work downtown don't have cars, and that those that do, there's a parking facility right near there where I would anticipate that they could park their car.
Thank you. Other questions for Mehmet or Steve? Councilmember Rowan?
This is just a little bit off topic. Actually, Mehmet, I'm going to ask you if you don't mind. I think this project's great. I think it's really consistent with this goal of 1,000 units, residential units downtown. And I think the way that this has shifted from a shelter into housing was actually really well done to not displace some people. There were people who needed shelter who were able to move into sort of a rental situation instead of an emergency shelter because of the way it was handled. And so I think it was really well done. But are we any closer, the mayor talks about this a lot, are we any closer to thoughts around urban play areas, urban parks, downtown? Is a rooftop like this suitable for gathering space? Is it not strong enough? Are we getting anywhere where we would have some gathering spaces downtown that might even be suitable for families?
Good question, yes. I mean, no idea is too wild or too crazy. So, we literally sometimes have some brainstorming sessions in the office and throw ideas on the wall. So we're constantly exploring that. And we want to make sure that when we do have an ideal location, that A, it's safe, B, it's accessible, C, it's sizable enough that it does actually convey the intent of having it available. With the rooftop, we always also explore that, and we always want to encourage and incentivize that. Of course, as you'll probably hear consistently from developers and whatnot, that adds to the cost of the project. And they have to make sure that certain safety parameters are in place for folks if they want to access the rooftop. But it is a constant exploration effort, I would say. Yeah.
Councilmember Nice?
Thank you, Mayor. Mehmet, I agree. I like the idea to see housing downtown. We need that for more activity in that. On your ROI, I was disappointed to see those calculations there, but I did have a question on the calculation, because this was a nonprofit. We were getting zero taxes on it.
Correct.
Are you figuring the increment over zero, or the increment over after now he's bought it, there's going to be an increment after this gets developed?
Sorry, the first part of your question,
is this increment you're calculating based upon from zero, or is the increment from now that he's actually converted it to from a nonprofit to a profit? He's paying taxes on it now.
Correct.
And so is this increment that you're saying that's going to be payback in 9 years just the difference between what they're paying today and what the future will be once it's developed? Or
Correct. Are
you saying this is everything?
No, yeah. So if I may go back to here, the formula, the way it works, this is not the entire project. The entire project is about 2.2, almost 2.3. But taking 80% of that, roughly, which is what we estimate to be the contribution to the increase in taxable value, you then multiply that by the commercial tax rate, and then you multiply that by the annual tax increment, which this is like $699 over 1,000, and then you get this number. Then you divide that, or the award, 250,000 divided by this gives you the number of the years, assuming that this is going to be our annual tax increment.
Okay, I guess the reason I'm asking is, and he would know how much his taxes is paying. I looked on the county record. It looks like he's paying, it was the $4,000 to $5,000 a year, I think what it was now. And so you're saying it's going to go up from $4,000 to $5,000 up to $27,000?
Well, and the other thing is, when you look at the county records, are you looking at all property taxes, or are you looking at
it was the urban rural?
Gotcha. Yeah.
I think it was $4,400.
Yeah, I mean that's again an estimate. The nice thing about this is that we'll be able to track that and correct as we move forward once we get assessments from the DOR. This year, August 2nd, I think, is when we hear from the DOR on how our TIF districts are doing. So then we'll be able to cross-reference these details and be able to update these formulas moving forward. Because again, this was relatively added recently to create a tool based on council's wish to start some sort of monitoring of these projects.
Okay, Mayor, then a quick follow-up on that, because I agree, I think it's a good tool to use, and I think we should measure it based upon the ROI in a lot of cases, but are we monitoring it when these projects are done or in process to see that we're actually meeting these ROI numbers? And if not, what are we doing to adjust them?
That's a good question. Yeah, I will definitely explore that with the committee and the board.
Maybe in our reports too, back to the council, when you do your annual reports, it would be helpful to see what those ROIs, how they're coming out.
Right.
Thank you very much. Further questions, or is there a motion? Do we have either further questions or motion? Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the tax increment financing assistance downtown urban renewal district for reimbursement of qualified improvements for renovations at 2520 First Avenue North in the Widmer Corporation, to the Widmer Corporation, Lincoln Apartments, up to the maximum of $250,000 as recommended by the DBP board.
Second, Councilmember Ripsis. Any discussion on the motion? Motion again is for approval. Before we proceed to a vote, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to a vote. Motion is for approval. Item now 7. There is no public hearing on this. So if in favor, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. You know, I'll just make a comment, and I think many of you know this, but I had the privilege of meeting with Steve almost a couple years ago, I guess. In those days, he was a evil politician, known as the mayor of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they had the privilege of being #1 on the Wall Street Journal's first index of emerging residential markets, and Billings was down in a lowly #6 out of hundreds and hundreds. So we were close. After that, Billings became #1. And Coeur d'Alene became #4, I think it was, so we had to put the knife in and turn that a little bit on him. But he and his family have now acquired 4 different properties in downtown Billings. They're very experienced regional developers. They know this part of the West, and they know the scale that Billings is used to, so it's an exciting development. We wish you the very best.
Just wanted to add, too, that my son does all the property management for the property. He now has a property management company that he started in Billings, started small. There's just 2 employees, but he's hoping to get bigger. He manages some other, so we're hoping to contribute to the job base. My wife as well has a couple of women's clothing stores in Coeur d'Alene. My daughter started a women's clothing store in Brooklyn, New York. So we have Marmalade, which is the name of her store, Coeur d'Alene. We have Marmalade Brooklyn, and my wife just mentioned the other day that maybe we needed a Marmalade Billings.
I think we all like Marmalade, absolutely. So thank you, Steve, and wish you the very best. Okay. Okay, that concludes new item 7. Item 8. Tony, would you read item number 8?
Tax increment finance assistance from East Billings Urban Renewal District to J&S Properties for redevelopment of property at 1523 Montana Avenue, up to $622,195. Bird Board recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of the Bird Board recommendation.
Okay, I don't see Zach or Wyeth. Oh, I'm sorry. Zach, you're very small. You're about 3 inches tall on our screen here. Sorry I missed you. So our presenter is Zach Tarakitis with the eBird. Zach, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen, but we may have the presentation up on the screen already there.
You should be able to share your screen, Zach.
Okay, I can do that now. And It's not allowing me, Kevin, on the Zoom side here.
Still not letting you pull it up?
No, it's not letting me, it says I can share, but I can't share from my laptop via Zoom, so I don't know if you can pull it up there and I can kind of have somebody send it along.
Yeah, what's the name of it? Is it of your PowerPoint?
It should be JNS Properties.
I'll pull it up here in just a second.
Thank you. JNS Properties Plant Council Presentation PDF. Great, excellent. So Mayor and Council, thanks for listening this evening. So second presentation, JNS Properties, is somebody we should be familiar with. We've seen them before. Kevin, if you'd forward that along.
Trying, but it's fighting me here.
There we go. Great. So JNS Properties, Water and Ice Plant. This is an existing Bird property owner and Bird business is expanding operations into our district. This facility will expand. It currently exists in the Bird on 4th and 18th. They have an ice manufacturing business there. They're expanding that, and they'll become the largest ice manufacturing facility in the region. State-of-the-art facility on a vacant lot. It's an expansion of an earlier TIF investment that you'll see as we come along a little bit later. And it's part of a larger growth plan as it will open up additional property in the neighborhood for some other redevelopment. And then just for some historical perspective, the zoning change was approved on Tuesday, March 2nd, 2020 from Central Works to Industrial Sanctuary to allow this facility. The property owners, Scott Jaserick and Jason Comerfeld, own a lot of property in the Bird in addition to being business owners in the neighborhood. And this is a redevelopment of one of their own properties, and it was right across the street zoning from Central Works to Industrial Sanctuary, so that was approved prior. Next slide, please. The drivers for us that both the project review committee and our board looked at is it meets a lot of our needs in our master plan for economic growth in the district as it expands this business. The mixed use and industrial centers is very much part of the Bird, as we all know. Retain, recruit, and expand existing businesses is part of our eBird master plan and implementation strategies. Compliance with SEPTED, these property owners have been engaged with SEPTED in the past, and they're very familiar and have worked through this over the last 18 months to make sure as they design this facility, it's going to be an asset through the SEPTED practices. And we've also discovered some new sustainability measures that do exist in our zoning that could be updated, and we were able to work through that with them as well. It's a blighted property, as you'll see as we come up, by many definitions, and this going on there would also eliminate that blight, but improvements would generate some increment and additional tax base for the city. Next slide. Neighborhood view, this is in the blue is First Avenue and that's at North 16th. That was an earlier TIF application and a project that was approved for $63,000-ish that increased the infrastructure, did some moving of some utility through there. The property we're looking at for the Yellowstone Water and Ice Plant is directly south of that property in the yellow. It's a half block that currently is vacant and is where this ice plant will land. Next slide, please. Here's go back one more. There's the current state of the property, as you can see. Here's the project view that will be coming. Yellowstone Ice and Water Plant, be a distribution center. Currently, they distribute all over the region, and they manufacture out of their smaller facility, but this will be a significant technological advance and also facility advance. And then here's the current state of the property, as you can see. They've been moving a little bit of dirt in the last starting last Wednesday, but you can see it sat vacant in this state, and you see those beautiful bird lights that still went around that property with no other existing infrastructure around that. If you look in the background of the largest photo there, well, actually, both of the buildings in the background are owned by JNS Properties, so this is a continuation of their investment in the neighborhood. Next slide. Yep, this is the example of Bellstone Ice and Water's retail space. The new asphalt sidewalk, existing infrastructure, and enhancements to the existing infrastructure were done on that project that we approved just over a year ago. Here's the analysis. Again, as Mehmet just mentioned, we're trying to become more consistent in how we are presenting this information. So these are the numbers that we came up to. The recommended amounts are on the far right as we looked at which things were eligible through the Montana tax code for TIF. We landed on the 622,195 based on their project expenses that came through in your packet. The total project cost that we're considering is for the build out of the project. There's an additional, at this point, $2.5 to $3.5 million that will go into this project for the equipment. They are both capitalized, not just for the build out of the facility, but also for the equipment that will go in there. So we've seen that information come across from their bank. They're ready for both the build out and the growth to happen within that facility. They'll be phasing that in over 2 phases. They will start out with equipment that will support their current operations as they work today, but they would be able to double that quickly to serve other ice distributors in the area where they could manufacture and bag for other smaller companies around the area that could then distribute out of their facility, which again would be bringing in people into Billings to pick up their ice and head out, in addition to them being able to expand their distribution. So the costs here are purely for their project costs for the building and enhancement of that area, and then again, there'll be another $2.5 to $3.5 million going into their ice and manufacturing technology on the inside. Next slide. So recommendations by the Bird Board to the directors: approval of the application, 13.36 identified eligible project cost not to exceed $622,195 to JNS Properties. Amount will be paid in 3 equal installments, $207,398 over 3 years. Here's where I mentioned again the project costs, but with the equipment addition could exceed $6.5 to $8 million is what we've kind of talked about. In the considerations, again, a blighted block to a new facility, connect with neighboring approved project that will update the infrastructure. This project has also helped us revisit a lot of the parking standards that were set when the Bird was first developed. So we've also been able to review a lot of work that was done in the past that really hasn't been implemented heading west of 13th. A lot of that work's been done 13th towards the Metra, but we'll be able to start looking at how our parking will change with the back-end parking on 15th and 16th with this project. And then when they move from their existing facility over to this facility, they have another 3/4 of a block that would become available for redevelopment in the Bird, and they actually already have interest in a portion of that property to remain in a manufacturing type setting in Central Works. And that's what I have for presentation, and any questions?
Very good, thank you. Questions, do you like Councilmember Ripsis?
Yes, Zach, I'm sure the board and staff have or they passed this or recommended it. It does seem like a large amount for what the increment you have. Is there just, can you speak to why the board really wants to go forward with this amount, given that it might limit other project awards?
Yeah, I guess we're of the bird in the hand situation here, where Councilmember Boyette did ask me just very recently of why haven't we seen a lot of work in the Bird happening, and there's a lot of projects happening in the Bird right now, and they're smaller incremental projects that are going on, but we have for a year now, not brought anything to council, and I think it's because there's a lot of things in the mix. We would love to see housing come into our neighborhood, and there's again, conversations happening there, both small scale. We have a 10-plex that's being considered right now in the North Park. We also have a lot of things that we're hearing about that would enhance some housing opportunities, but at this point, it's a great project for the neighborhood because, again, it's going to expand that business pretty significantly. That, for the increment, we spread it out over 3 years, and most of the people I meet with, because of the size of the increment in the eBird, we've explained to most folks that are interested that it'll probably be a multi-year payout on these so that we're not hamstringing ourselves. The reason we felt that this was also not stretching too far is that the First Interstate Bank TIF project and the GSA, the Boyer Group GSA project, were both projects we wrapped up with in the last 24 months. And the amount we were paying out to those two TIF projects almost equals this exact amount. So we know that the district can handle it and continue supporting other projects.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Repsis?
Yeah, I guess, Zach, you addressed a lot of it already, but I guess as I was looking at this, right after the conversation we just had about the Lincoln Apartments, where they're paying back over a 5-year cycle, did you consider a 5-year cycle instead of a 3 to keep some of that? You said you've got a lot of projects in the hopper. We don't want to end up in the situation where we can't help where other projects might be needed. But can you talk about the timing of the 3-year versus a 5-year kind of repayment cycle?
Yeah, I think it's really, the situation we're in is sitting down and working through all of this with JNS from the inception of the idea. And part of it is just what's happened over the last 2 years. This project is significantly more expensive than it was when they started out. They have not been dragging their feet at any point in time. I mean, this has been a very consistent project that we've known about from the beginning. And I think we feel that getting it up and off the ground is a good idea to, again, create more momentum. The Bird has a lot of discussion happening, but we're not seeing projects go in the ground. So again, small, incremental, great projects that we're excited about, that I think that if we were funding those projects, we would still have resource available for the size that we're currently having talks. So, I mean, we're just not seeing a large, 200 housing unit project on the horizon that's in the next 2 years, maybe. I'd say 18 months, 2 years would be pretty safe to say that that's when we would see something really come forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw and Councilmember Neese?
Thank you. I move to approve tax increment finance assistance from East Billings Urban Renewal District, the eBird, to JNS Properties for redevelopment of property at 1523 Montana Avenue, up to $622,195 as recommended by the Bird Board.
Thank you. Motion is for approval. Councilor Repsis, you had the second. Okay. Councilmember Shaw, do you want to speak to your motion? And then Councilmember Neese?
I don't think I really need to belabor this. I think this was a good presentation. I trust the judgment of the Bird Board and looking out in the coming years and having your ear to the ground and knowing what you're hearing talk about, that you're not going to tie up too much of this funding unnecessarily. And I think this is a great business that I love the idea that they're going to expand so much. I think how many new jobs is that going to be? So I think this is a really strong investment for the eBird, and I hope that we support it.
Thank you, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, that's a question I had, Kendra, was how many jobs? Because they're a successful business. They're growing, they're expanding. But how many, this is not adding housing like we just did before, but how many new jobs is this going to add?
Yeah, the new job is negligible because the increase of technology coming into that market. I think the difference is that we're talking about the opportunity for them to bring in-house. Currently, I've learned a lot about this over the last 2 years, but there's a lot of small ice distributors all throughout the region, all the way over into Bozeman. So within a 2-hour radius, there's a lot of small ice manufacturers. And these have the potential for all coming to Billings. So you will have trucks in and out of Billings. We have a lot more economics behind this versus just the job creation. They're not going to lose jobs, but it's not going to be a 50-job increase. You know, if they'll probably add, right now, I think they have a staff of 11 to 12 that are in the facility, and they may add another 5, if that. But their distribution is just something they're not counting on at this point because they're only focused on growing what they do today. The potential for bringing on these other distributors is significant because no one else in this area has this sort of technology that's operating. So,
Mayor, if you may.
Go ahead.
So and maybe it's just me in hearing what you're saying, but it sounds to me like there's going to be a net job loss in the state of Montana because you're talking about these other places around the state that are currently manufacturing will not be doing it anymore. It can be done here in Billings in a more efficient way, and we'll get a few more jobs here, but the net job loss in Montana may be net loss. Do I understand that? Am I hearing you correctly on that, or is that not?
I honestly couldn't speak to that knowledgeably enough to say in the ice manufacturing business how many folks are working site to site. We talked about it, and we can only speak for, you know, Yellowstone Ice and Water. You know, they will be adding jobs for their current operations once this facility is open. But I don't know if, you know, people are losing 2 to 3 people in their manufacturing and adding those jobs in distribution routes with new trucks. You know, I really don't know that I can speak to it other than what we've talked about specifically for Yellowstone Ice and Water. And you know, they hope to grow, but like I said, they're doing it in phases based on demand. And if that demand doesn't come, then they'll just continue doing what they're doing and grow their operation as planned.
I have another question.
Okay, and then we'll move on to Councilmember Owen and Puritan.
Yeah. Did your board look at the payback time on this? Because 13 years is a really long time. Have you considered a lower amount? Was there any discussion about having a lower amount just because of the payback is going to be so long on this?
You know, I think in the bird right now, it's a hard, we look at it a little more comprehensively, that this one project is the momentum, it's one more thing in the momentum of getting the East Billings Urban Renewal District off the ground. I mean, I've been there 28 months now, and it's a really exciting neighborhood with a lot of potential, but we're still dealing with potential. And I think 12 years in the history of the bird, if you remember, the GSA and the FIB projects are 10 and 11 years old. Not much happened after those projects went in the ground because a lot of speculative buying went in place, jacked the prices up of the land. Currently, that's not what we're seeing. Most of the conversations we're having are actual projects, not people trying to buy land to hold and sit. And I think what we're trying to encourage is momentum and getting, and 12 years in the life of the bird has been a pretty short. So I hear and understand what you're saying generally across all of our TIF projects. But these guys are investors. They've shown that they have nice properties. They have businesses to support those properties. They employ a ton of people in the neighborhood. And we're pretty confident that that turnaround time could be even more, because if we have a few more catalyst projects actually get off the ground, then we would see the momentum we need in the eBird.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Puritan.
Mayor, I think Councilmember Puritan might have been ahead of me.
Okay, Councilmember Puritan.
We'll both get there. Thanks, Zach. And that was one of my questions too, was that payback period. I thought it was a little lengthy. So just to confirm, the former building, that is now the retail front. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
No, there's an existing facility that is their new retail space that used to be located at their old facility on 4th and 18th. Okay. But their newer space is on 1st and 16th, directly connected to this property. So they'll be able to retail directly out. Their other 3/4 of a block will become available whenever that works for their business plan. That's again.
Okay, so that was what I was trying to figure out, what that 3/4 city block was. So that's the old facility.
You bet. Yep. Okay. That they're currently operating out of. It'll be old once they transition into this one.
So the other question that I had was that you mentioned there would be a regional distribution what does that region entail?
Well, their current, again, I'm speaking, I know Scott and Jason trust me on this, but I mean, it's their current region. I mean, they have Sheridan, Cody, up to the High Line. I mean, they distribute ice and water all over this side of the state. And I think that with this sort of manufacturing, they could expand that distribution or service their existing clients at a better level, because the amount of time it takes them to produce a trailer load of ice, a semi-load of ice, will be hours versus a few days with the increase in technology. And so it's a pretty amazing, and this I have seen through them, it's a pretty amazing improvement for how they'll be able to do business.
Okay, and the other question, Mr. So, and this is just a comment too, with fuel prices the way they are right now, I don't know if that's going to affect that distribution, that it's going to have an impact on what they think they're going to make off of, increasing the size of that. But the question that I had was, there were certain things that I know they're approved by the code, and some of it has to do with the architect, the designing, landscaping, fencing, some of those things. But as I look into how much you recommended, how much the board recommended, how do they go through that? What is that process? So for $196,000 for the architecture, design, and permitting, you recommended $78,000. So could you just kind of walk through how you make those determinations?
You bet. So starting at ground zero, as I work with every property owner as they're developing their ideas of what they're going to do, and make sure they're well informed of TIF and what's eligible, what's not eligible, et cetera, et cetera. Once we receive an application, it goes to our review committee, and our review committee has been given an idea of what the priorities are based on. And we have this meeting on July 20th. Everybody's welcome to come. It's an open meeting, but our board meets annually to set the priorities for our district. And those get down into specific, as landscaping is important as, new sidewalks and streets. So those priorities are set by the board that we then filter down to our annual training at our review committee meetings so that they understand what's the most important to us. Sometimes, we've talked with the other TIF districts. Some groups, they don't really look at the planning piece as being part of it with the architecture fees, et cetera. But for us, like I said before, we need momentum and we need projects in the ground. So we consider everything to be part of that project getting completed. And that's where I think our board priorities filter down to the review committee. The review committee looks at it. They make sure that we're in line with what the board has set as our priorities, and then we bring that back to the board, and the board makes sure it's part of a better overall view for the bird. So that would be, the minutia comes down from the board to the review committee and myself, and then it gets kicked back up to them once the review committee says, yep, this is technically how it works against the Montana code.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Councilmember Tricky.
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. We skipped you. Yes, all right. So Councilmember Owen and then Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you, Mayor.
You had your chance and then you gave it away.
That's what kindness gets me, is what I've learned tonight.
Exactly, yes.
So, Zach, I admit to having quite a bit of heartburn about this project, quite honestly. It is a significant portion of the eBird budget with a really slow payback, relatively low applicant equity, which concerns me. And I'm not really sold on the public benefit. Like, it doesn't strike me, based on the presentation I've heard tonight, that the eBird dollars are catalytic to this project. It seems to me like this project is going to happen no matter what, and the eBird dollars might just make it a little more lucrative to have this project happen. So feel free to answer any of those, but specifically, I'd like you to address a couple of just questions that I have. This first line here of demolition and dealing with undocumented soils, I don't really know what that means, but I'm curious if any of that work would qualify for the Brownfields Fund at Big Sky Economic Development. I don't know if this would fall under that eligibility and maybe reduce a little of the eBird cost. I'm curious, since this is phase 2 of a project, what you can tell us about the impact of phase 1. Has the increment been in line with your previous projections? Are you seeing those dollars flow in the way that you have expected? And then what can you tell us a little more about what's going to happen at 4th and 18th? That's already not a very attractive corner, and now it's going to have an abandoned building on it. So if you could just feel free to have at any of those that you like.
Yeah, well, I think, as far as it goes on 4th and 18th, these are pretty active property owners. They've had somebody interested in the property already, which for them is good. It's part of their overall plan. Could you back up on the first part? Well, the first part that's giving you heartburn on it.
Just generally.
Generally. Well, it comes back to the attitude I think our board has right now is that, again, I've been in the position over 2 years, and we've had really great momentum on cool things. But the bird, for a long time, has been a pretty significantly blighted neighborhood. And it was, I think, a pretty easy decision for it to be established that way. And I strongly believe that what happened that we have to avoid is that if we don't start getting projects in the ground that are moving, we're going to see speculative buying to hold on to things, and the bird could die all over again because the land prices will go back up. Now, again, we're living in a different era right now, and I can't predict any of that stuff. But this particular project, they're invested property owners. We know it's going to be a good project. But I will say, guaranteed, is that we had the but for discussion, and many TIF projects, even at this, per state statute, say a lot of TIF projects need to be considered is, will this project happen without TIF involved, yes or no? And as this sits, because of the prices, these guys aren't just developers coming in to do something. These are local guys who own a lot of property, have made investments, and they are towing the line without TIF being part of this project. It may not be able to go forward, and we've looked at all the finances. We have been working with them over 20 months we've known this is coming. We've seen how it's going, and it's a very, very expensive manufacturing facility. And so we are concerned that if some amount of TIF, and we haven't found that threshold yet because the numbers keep changing. I mean, most of their equipment's stainless steel, which is a little difficult to get your hands on right now. And so we do have concerns that if the reason we were pretty aggressive with this project is because if it doesn't go, we're sitting on an empty block with no infrastructure, and we got to wait for somebody to come in and buy that block that sits next to Pierce Packing Plant, which is, again, a mixed-use development right there. On the other side is JNS and Auto Resource. I mean, nobody's going to come in and build a housing unit on this property because it's surrounded by industrial. It really is part of the bird. And the fact that 2020 is when we kind of approved this adjustment, we've known this project is viable, but the costs have changed significantly. I mean, they're up. And that's where we haven't held back because we need to see the actual projects that are talked about getting in the ground and going, or the bird is going to have a tough time getting off the ground.
So how is phase 1 tracking in terms of increment versus what you had projected?
So phase 1, when I said phase 1 on this project, phase 1 is how they're starting their business in this facility. So they will bring on enough equipment to operate Yellowstone Water and Ice as it is today with their regular potential growth. Phase 2 would be if there's additional distribution coming into the area because smaller manufacturers see the opportunity to have their ice and water bagged, labeled, set right there, and they pull their trucks up and then they distribute out of Billings, which means additional gas, trucks got a flat tire, a lot of other businesses can benefit from these trucks coming in and moving out of Billings, taking the ice out of here. But, so yes, their phase 1 hasn't happened. It happens once the facility's up and moving.
No, I mean your phase 1, because the staff memo says that you gave phase 1 of this business relocation $63,000 already.
Oh, yeah, sorry, that wasn't my language. It was just how it came, sorry, in the memo.
So is that generating increment for you already?
That retail space is hopping. I mean, their numbers are spectacular. Yellowstone Water Ice is doing great. And it took the retail off of 4th that had a very dangerous, you could not pull off of 4th Avenue to go in and get your ice and water. You had to park on 4th and walk in. So it wasn't a very ideal retail situation, to now a very nice storefront with parking that you can pull off, get your water and ice. I mean,
But is it generating the increment that you had projected?
Sorry, ask me that again?
Is it generating the tax increment that you had projected?
Well, to be honest, we're still working on the calculations for that based on the state formula that we are using, and we've just kind of picked up on that over the last year. But on $63,000, what we have to measure is what did that actually accomplish, and that was the infrastructure around the facility to allow it to be a more usable retail space for the business. The $63,000 increment calculation is, I think, fairly negligible when you look at the entire neighborhood. I mean, we need multiple more projects to see our increment increase. A $63,000 investment, I think the return is that the business is continuing to grow and expand. So I think that's kind of how our board, we have to be more global at looking at our neighborhoods. We can't go street by street because we just have so much work needing to be done.
So then my last question was, does any of this qualify for the EPA brownfields funding?
This particular project, I think that there's never been petroleum on that site. So if it did, it would be really minimal. And the other part of that is that money doesn't come back to Big Sky EDA until September. And they're trying to get this project, like I said, we've been working on it for well over 20 months. So the timing issue, they would have to continue to wait. And then you're looking at maybe not that I'm acting like these are small numbers, but maybe $10,000 reimbursement for the phase 1 on that, which has already been done, and I think it's clean. So there's just some that has to come out and be taken care of there. So I really think it would be a small amount for waiting for a potential approval in months from now.
Okay, thank you. We should move on. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Well, I'm very, very excited to hear this project is moving forward. Each one of our TIF districts is very different, and the Ebert is in an industrial area, and it is and has been very blighted. You've done a lot of work at demolition of taking out things that were public safety issues that were challenging for redevelopment. And so I hope that this is the catalyst that you need to continue to redevelop areas of the Ebert. So I do support this. I think it's a good opportunity. It's a challenge also because the Ebert is just different. Downtown has done a really great job of branding itself. It's downtown, and they do the pictures and they do the newsletters and all of that. And I think South Billings is about ready to take off like that, where it's going to be able to really put in, I hope, and I'm hoping, and that kind of brand itself. And Ebert will be able to do that too. And I think that even though your projects are small and you're not looking at something that's really headline grabbing in terms of this project, it is very important in economics. The economics of this kind of redevelopment and that commercial base is very important. So I do support this, and I hope this is something that helps to spark more development in the area.
Thank you, Councilor Purington. And just a reminder, Council, we do not have a motion on the floor.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Back to your notes.
7 pages. Yeah. You're right. And a second by Councilmember Florupsis. Okay. Thank you for reminding that. So let's move on, try to wrap this up and move to a vote. Councilmember Purington?
So one of your first line items, it's one of more expensive items was the demolition, and I don't know what over X of undocumented soil means either, but oh, I'm sure you could. We should ask you. But so you've already said that they're already starting to move dirt there, and I thought that they could not. I mean, I thought that was part of asking for TIF funds, is that you couldn't start anything before this has been approved. So I'm kind of wondering about the.
Great question. Excellent question, Councilwoman Purrington. And I made sure that I called everybody to kind of clarify that point. And when that was kind of part of the TIF discussion over the years, there was a point in our TIF history where people were completing projects to their entirety and then coming to the districts and asking for reimbursement. The way the wording is set up is that we have to receive, once we receive an application, if they can continue to move forward, they're kind of the ones taking on the risk of not receiving TIF. It doesn't have to be fully approved for them to start to move dirt. Once we have an application in hand, that means it is actively being reviewed, and so they can start on their project. It's just the prevention was to keep people from completing projects and then coming back after the fact and saying, hey, we would love a reimbursement on this. This is how much it cost us. So I did work with planning, our other districts, and called around to make sure that I had that correct. So they can't be near completion, but once we receive an application in hand at one of the districts, then if they need to start some of the process, they can.
Councilor Tricky?
That's how it was explained to me.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Tricky?
Once again, I have to admit that I am a regular customer of Yellowstone Water, but I am not going to recuse myself. And I just mentioned that because going into the new store as opposed to the old store is a lot easier, incredible difference. And they've even got automatic dispensers on the outside, so you can put your 5-gallon thing there and put your credit card in and whatnot. You know, so the upgrades there are really good. It was very interesting on the day when the water treatment plant shut down. Normally when I walk in there, on a day that I walk in there, there might be one other person in there. There were 12 people in line that day, and they were moving them through there really fast. I'm actually really excited about this project. I think it's actually a really wonderful example of dealing with blight. A different type of blight than we normally think about, but blight nonetheless. And that is when our manufacturing companies, their technology starts to age out. And what we are essentially doing is helping a local business stay current with its technology so that it can stay in the market and continue to grow and expand. And at the same time, bring one block of a sidewalk to Montana Avenue. So I strongly support this. I think it's worth every dollar. And I was under the assumption that it was an $8 million investment total. So this is a 600,000 is well within the range. Or actually, it's probably right at about the range, 15%, 16%. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll just comment, Zach, if this is approved, momentum is critical, I think, for eBird, and I appreciate that being a goal. I hope that the developer will not just build a mediocre white giant pole barn and call it good. I think we have an opportunity here. You have an opportunity here. All of eBird has an opportunity here to make in a couple ways, have a real presence on Montana there with a building that's better than you might expect, landscaping. We've got the lights. This has an opportunity to shine in a way that getting rid of sewer pipes or old sewer pipes will never compete with, or even the street lights. So let's try to do it right visually, but also let's make a story out of it with the newspaper and the media, maybe some promotion, free ice for July, or for a popsicle for anyone who wants it in July. It might be a little more affordable, but something, yeah, to really make a story, because this is more than just one new building. This is the first well, I don't know, it's not the first, well, yeah, I guess first major new construction in whatever time period since the Billings Op Center went in, things like that. So it's just a good opportunity. We don't want to lose that opportunity. So that's my comment. Councilmember Tricky, and then Councilor, we were prepared to vote.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Mayor. There was one other thing that I just wanted to be on record about. I was on record during the first time, and I want to repeat it again this time. It concerns me that we now have two new large users of our city's water supply that are basically taking water and selling it to people outside of the city. I'm not concerned at this point, but I do want us to keep an eye on this and be thinking about whether or not we need to create a separate rate for people like the new Coca-Cola bottling plant and Yellowstone Water.
Okay, Councilmember Neeson-Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm probably certain this is going to pass, but I'm going to vote against this. I just think it's a little too much. I think this organization probably would have done this without the bird funds, or maybe a portion of it. I would like to see the TIF districts do a little bit of what like the downtown did here. Look at the award and look at their budget and really kind of stretch it. I think this project would have gone through with half the amount of the award, and still brought down a great area down to the eBird to really kind of kick off that area. So I would really ask the board to kind of look at those numbers and think about the future projects you can actually spur on with additional money than that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw, any
Your Honor,
comment?
I was just going to call the question if you're not prepared to take us to a vote.
I'm prepared to move to a vote. So, Council, the motion is for approval consistent with the staff recommendation. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Voting in opposition, Councilmembers Neese and Owen. Okay, so the motion passes 8-2. Thank you very much. That concludes item 8. Do we have any public comment on things not on our agenda this evening? Nobody is online, so close that. Do we have any council initiatives? Don't have any of those, so we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.